Dawn, thank you very much. The top stories. Authorities in Washington, D.C. say they don't expect to find any survivors after a plane and a helicopter collided in mid-air over the Potomac River. These are the latest live shots from the U.S. Capitol. More than 300 emergency responders are searching for survivors. 64 people, including crew, were on the American Airlines flight. 3 soldiers were on board the Black Hawk helicopter. At least 28 bodies have already been recovered. This was the plane coming into land at Reagan Washington National Airport seconds before the collision. The helicopter was on a training flight when the crash happened just before 9 p.m. local time. It's the first major U.S. commercial air crash since 2009.
Despite all those efforts, we are now at a point where we are switching from a rescue operation to a recovery operation. At this point, we don't believe there are any survivors from this accident. And we have recovered 27 people from the plane and 1 from the helicopter.
In other news, 3 Israeli hostages and 5 Thai nationals held in Gaza have been released by the terror group Hamas and are now back in Israel. 20-year-old Agam Berger, a female soldier, was handed over to the Red Cross in Jabalia in northern Gaza earlier before being transferred to the Israeli military at the border. The Israeli military confirmed a further 7 hostages have been handed over to the Red Cross, including Savili and Gadi Moses and Arbel Yehud, along with 5 unnamed Thai nationals. Their release is not part of the official ceasefire deal. However, there were chaotic scenes in southern Gaza for the handing over of Arbel Yehud and Gadi Moses, who were surrounded. Israel is suspending the release of 100 Palestinian prisoners following the chaotic scenes in Khan Yunis, according to multiple reports in the Israeli media. Meanwhile, Reuters news agency reports that buses that were carrying the detainees have been told to head back to the prisons. Elsewhere, increasing numbers of people from the EU are abusing the common travel arrangement with Ireland to enter the UK to work illegally. GBNews can exclusively reveal that many Romanians and Bulgarians in particular are avoiding border checks by crossing from the Republic, while others are simply arriving on tourist visas before finding work. GBNews was given exclusive access to accompany immigration enforcement teams who've increased the number of raids they carry out by 1/3 since Labour came to power. Elsewhere, the Bishop of Liverpool has resigned after allegations of sexual assault and harassment were made against him. The Right Reverend Dr. John Perambula said he had decided to retire without any admission of fault or liability to avoid the issue becoming a distraction. This comes after Channel 4 News reported one woman had accused the bishop of kissing her without consent and groping her, and another woman accused him of sexual harassment. He continues to deny any wrongdoing. In other news, water bills are set to rise in England and Wales by an average of £123 per household from April. It means a typical bill will rise by 26%, from £480 per year to £603. The industry body Water UK says the extra money will fund infrastructure projects and will provide help for struggling customers, but consumer groups are warning the rise means more households will fall into debt. Now, fewer than half of parents think children should know how to use books correctly before starting primary school, with some instead trying to swipe as if using a tablet. And only 3 in 4 parents think children should be toilet trained before starting school, according to a poll for early years charity Kindred Squared. It found teachers believe children are entering primary school with delays in basic motor skills and a lack of core strength because of excessive screen time, and found a huge disparity between when teachers and parents consider children to be ready for school. And retail crime is now at an all-time high, with more than 2,000 incidents reported a day. Last year, more than 70 incidents alone included use of a weapon, with double reported in the previous year. Thefts have reached 20 million incidents per year, costing retailers £2.2 billion annually. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. More from me in half an hour.
Hello, welcome back. Thank you very much, Tatiana. Now, GB News can reveal that increasing numbers of EU nationals are entering the country and working illegally. Home and Security Editor Mark White has given exclusive access to accompany immigration enforcement teams who have increased the number of raids they carry out by a third since Labour came to power. Let's have a look.
Under the cover of darkness, immigration officers and police move into this large agricultural business in North Wales.
No one up there? No, I'm in touch.
They're on the hunt for immigrants working here illegally. And it doesn't take long to find their first suspect.
On you now?
The man they've detained is a Romanian national.
What's your permission to be in the UK? You got a visa to come to the UK?
For several years after Brexit, EU citizens enjoyed a grace period when authorities didn't prosecute those working here unlawfully. But now, if they breach the rules, they're treated like any other illegal immigrant.
What visa have you got? Work visa?
For 6 months, yeah.
6 months? Visit visa?
Yes.
OK. Right. You're not allowed to work with that, OK? So at the moment, OK, you're under arrest, OK? For breaching the conditions of your leave to remain in the UK. Do you understand?
As fellow officers search for other suspects, the Romanian has walked back to his accommodation on the site for further checks.
Anybody else in your caravan?
Inside a cluster of caravans, more suspects, all Romanian, are being questioned.
Where is your passport?
Officers told me they see very significant numbers of Romanians and Bulgarians in particular abusing UK immigration rules to work here illegally. An increasingly popular means of arrival is through the common travel arrangement with Ireland, and some of those detained here may well have come through that route.
We've got individuals that we've got a trace of them exiting the country. We've got no trace of them coming into the country. So we haven't bottomed that out yet, but what we found in the past is that they will have come through Ireland and then through the common travel area, you know, avoiding the controls.
In nearby offices, another group of Romanians are being questioned. Although the Home Office was unable to provide us with a detailed breakdown of the number of EU nationals arrested on immigration offences over the past year, this enforcement team told me it's definitely on the rise, and many are coming through Ireland.
Not just the EEA nationals that are going through Ireland, it's, you know, it's other foreign nationals because it's, you know, it can be like the back door into the UK. So you know, you've got the small boats where people are coming in illegally. You've got other clandestine that come in the back of lorry, but obviously there's the abuse of the CTA as well.
Many others are simply arriving on tourist visas and then finding employment in breach of the law. As officers question the suspects with the help of interpreters over the phone, it quickly becomes apparent why some are willing to take the risk.
OK, so how much do you get paid?
1,000 a week.
£1,000 per week.
For those employing illegal workers, these enforcement raids can be very costly indeed, with fines of up to £45,000 per illegal worker. Yet right across the country, thousands of employers continue to flout the law. Since Labour came to power, immigration enforcement raids have increased by more than a third over the same period the year before. But despite more than 3,000 arrests over the past 6 months, it's still only a tiny fraction of the number of illegal immigrants here, with unofficial estimates putting that figure at more than 1.5 million. Mark White, GB News, North Wales.
Blooming shocking, isn't it? How is this still happening? How is it still happening? Well, let's find out. So let's go to GB News Home and Security Editor Mark White himself to find out. Mark, wonderful package there. If I can say that to a man these days. Any case, it is a very, very good package. But it is shocking. The only good thing... So stop sniggering, young man. The only good thing I took from that was that raids are up by a third, so Labour are doing something.
Well, there's no doubt that Labour want to focus very significantly on that law enforcement element of trying to end the migrant crisis, in particular the small boat crisis. But the difficulty, of course, is that it's such a momentous task. These organised criminal gangs are well established, just like the drugs trade. They have well-sourced lines of supply, sophisticated ways of operating now in the source countries where these migrants are coming from, and trying to get that law and order enhancement, if you like, to work not just in this country, but to work with partners overseas will not be easy. And I think another thing that report exposes is that, yes, while the small boats crisis is a very visible manifestation of the overall migrant crisis, it is a tiny proportion of those who are coming into this country to live illegally and to work illegally. Many of those coming in on scheduled airlines, coming in through ferries or through the Channel Tunnel, sometimes with forged documents, and often, as we heard in that report now, and increasingly so, coming up over that border from the Irish Republic. Well, we've been speaking to, or my colleague Christopher Hope has been speaking to the Home Secretary Yvette Cooper as she responded directly to our report.
We need much stronger action on the illegal working, and that's why since the election we have increased the raids for illegal working by 30% and increased arrests by 25%, alongside increasing returns by over 20%. That's just since the election, and that's because we've strengthened the returns enforcement teams operating in the Home Office, because we do see that as a priority. The problem with the illegal working is it's breaking the rules, it's breaking our laws, but it's also often you have people being exploited by unscrupulous employers.
Well, earlier this afternoon, the Immigration and Asylum Bill was laid before Parliament, and that will give the government hopes the authorities more powers to deal more robustly with these criminal gangs, more powers under the Terrorism Act, terrorism-like powers, I should say, that will allow them to intervene more quickly to round up those they suspect of being involved in organised people smuggling. Also, the likes of powers to seize mobile phones and other electronic devices so that they can scan them, look for connections with other groups and individuals in the smuggling trade. But it is an almighty task, as I said, and one of the difficulties going forward, as many of the government, is that there is not in this immigration and asylum bill a deterrent. In fact, the bill will repeal the previous legislation that the Conservatives introduced, allowing for that Rwanda deterrent scheme.
Mark, just very quickly before you go, you've covered this story for a long time. You know what you're doing here. Nothing should surprise you anymore. But watching this, I'm a little bit shocked that this is still going on to this extent.
Well, it is. I mean, and the truth of it is, I said towards the end of the report that the unofficial estimates, because there are no government estimates, and how would they know? Because unless they've actually caught them and arrested them, they don't necessarily have an accurate figure for the number of people working out there in the illegal economy, the black economy, the grey economy, whatever you want to describe it as. But it's at least 1.5 million, we believe. 1.5 million people who are out there who are not contributing to the exchequer in any way, shape or form. Quite the reverse. They are using up vital services that many other people who do pay their taxes don't get to use quite as freely as they might have before, because they're so overstretched.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you very much for that report, Mark White. Now, new counter-terror style powers to smash the gangs, have been introduced in Parliament as part of a landmark legislation to protect our borders. But are the public really are you really convinced this one's going to work? A new poll... OK, so... Right, a new poll has put Reform... Sorry about that. A new poll has put Reform UK ahead of the Tories and Labour. So could Nigel Farage really be our next Prime Minister? Two things there that are kind of linked, aren't they? Let's bring in GBNews political editor, Christopher Hope. Chris, thank you very much for joining me today. What's going on?
Well, this is a real moment, I think, Dawn. We know the government jacked in the Rwanda plan, the deportation plan, that was anecdotally working. Reporters said they met migrants in northern France who weren't going to come here because the Tories were sent to Rwanda. Some went down Southern Ireland from Northern Ireland. As Mark White said there, this plan announced today will repeal the Safety of Rwanda Asylum and Immigration Act. The Rwanda plan is legally dead as a result of this. It also repeals large parts of the Illegal Immigration Act 2023. And that means that had required that illegal migrants crossing the Channel should not have asylum claims considered, and oblige the government to remove them to a country of origin or a safe third country. That's being removed. Essentially, the Tories are saying this hour, this is a catastrophic idea. It will turn the UK into Europe's soft touch for asylum. What's happened politically is the government is saying none of the Tory ideas are working. Here's our idea, as Mark said, they're using counter-terror powers, taking away devices, passports and the like, and being tougher on upstream, trying to work hard, more closely with for law enforcement on the continent. It's a massive punt on an idea here which may not work either, but it's the government saying when they get a grip of it. But as the Tories, in Tories' world, this is a complete disaster for tackling small boats.
Chris, where is the deterrent? I mean, almost every other country at the moment are introducing deterrents. You know, Italy, sort of like, you know, are actually managing to tackle this problem. We have no deterrent. How is anything that's happening at the moment going to stop the boats?
Italy is looking at some form of offshore processing, not deportation. Different, because they can come back from Albania if they're processed. And Italy is also giving money to individuals, countries in Northern Africa to try and stop them making that perilous journey. So they've got a different approach, which is apparently working. This government is not doing any of this. It is going all in on enforcement. We saw there from Mark White's coverage. I've interviewed the Home Secretary, and that plays out on our channel at 5 p.m. when I do ask her those questions. Just while I'm with you, though, I must mention the polling you mentioned at the beginning there. Reform UK is now 27 points in the polls, up ahead of Labour on 23 points, Tories 21 points. Find Out Now polled 2,500 adults yesterday. Why this matters is because it increases by 1 the poll that Find Out Now gave them a week ago. It also means they are outside the margin of error. 2 to 3 points is the margin of error. Reform UK have burst clear of that. They are now the clear leader in the polls, according to this poll from Find Out Now. But not all polls agree. Survation has a second poll out also this hour. They have Labour down 3 points at 27, Reform up 4 at 24 points. What is clear is that the momentum in politics, so important for parties, is absolutely right now with Reform UK.
With Reform. And do you think it is migration that is driving that?
I think it's a general feeling that none of the parties are doing what they thought they would get. I mean, if the Tories have gone to the background, they are now in opposition for 5 years. Labour had a chance post-election. They've squandered, I think, momentum they had in the summer. They waited for a budget which then hit companies quite hard, and surprisingly hard, with increase in national insurance, which come in, by the way, in April this year. Haven't come in yet. They've increased the minimum wage for young people. It's getting harder to get a job. The employment market is falling. Economy is stagnating. Great language from Rachel Reeves yesterday. I was with her in Oxfordshire, but frankly, where is the result? And if the result doesn't happen, this will get worse. This will get worse for Labour. Yeah,
it was a lot of language, wasn't it? 45 minutes worth of language, and the only word I heard was growth.
Yeah.
Christopher Hope, thank you very much. You'll be seeing more of Christopher later on in the show, including that exclusive with Yvette Cooper. Now, time is running out for your chance to become our biggest ever giveaway winner, and it's an incredible £50,000 in your bank account, and that's totally tax-free. Rachel Reeves can't get any of it, don't worry about that. And you can spend it however you like. Make sure you don't miss out. Here's how you do it.
Lines close tomorrow on your chance to win our biggest cash prize so far. £50,000 in tax-free cash. How would you react if you won?
It's such a nice feeling.
Just go for it.
It's one text, and if I can win, anyone can win.
I was on cloud 9.
I'd say don't hesitate, do it.
For another chance to win £50,000 cash, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus plus 1 standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. tomorrow. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Yeah, good luck indeed. Now, we don't believe there are any survivors. That's what officials have said after the devastating plane crash in Washington, D.C. I'm Daubney Neeson. This is GB News, Britain's news channel. Don't go too far. We'll see you soon.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Nana Akwe, weekends from 3 p.m.
5 years ago now, we developed this campaign called Regifting Beauty. And Regifting Beauty is about giving back to those that are in less fortunate situations than the majority of us. And I was coming across people that were receiving gifts at Christmas. You know how many gifts we receive? Gift sets, items, bath bombs, all of these things that we don't necessarily use. For myself, they sit in the bathroom cupboard all year round. So I was thinking of a way how we can make that better, put that to better purpose. And we developed this campaign 5 years ago called Regifting Beauty. And it's where people can donate unwanted toiletries, sanitary items, skincare, perfumes, and we work with different charities around the country, and they will re-gift them to survivors of domestic abuse. And for years now, it's only really been focused around women. There hasn't really been a male focus. So Ben and I were having conversations, and we were thinking, well, and I was getting comments throughout the years of doing it, saying, why are men excluded from this? Surely it should be applicable to men too. I mean, in the UK, over 700,000 men are suffering with domestic abuse on an annual basis. And a lot of that goes unreported. And there's over 2 million people in the UK that do suffer from some form of domestic abuse, be it physical or psychological, and it's an important topic that we should be discussing. So this campaign is about providing something that may seem trivial, but it restores some level of dignity, and I think that's so important when survivors are just trying to regain aspects of their life. Something so small that maybe sitting in your bathroom cupboard that you're not using could go to such better use. So this year we're launching the Regifting Beauty, the Turnaround Edition, about turning around moments in life and allowing people to have those turnaround moments, which also plays on Ben's, song, Turnaround.
Gotta turn
it fits in nicely with that.
Which I'll be on with you.
For the remix,
it's all fitting in nicely, isn't it?
GB News, the People's Channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Hello, welcome back. I am Daubney Neeson. The screen in front of me says I'm Martin Daubney, but I'm seriously not. There are slight differences, honestly. I am Daubney Neeson, and this is GB News, in any case. Now, the horror story that happened overnight, absolute tragedy this morning in Washington, D.C., miles away from the White House. These images, you can see now, I believe, on your screen, show the passenger jet with, you can see them now, with 64 people on board, colliding with a US Army helicopter before crashing into the river. All passengers are now feared dead. 27 bodies have been recovered, and posting to Truth Social, President Donald Trump says this is a bad situation that looks like it could have been prevented. not good in capitals, his word. The live shots you can see now coming from Washington, and you can see how cold it is there. There's ice on that river there, and that is where the plane crashed into. Joining us now is GB News US correspondent from Washington, Tim Davis. Thank you very much. Oh, Steve Edgerton. Steve, thank you very much for joining me. Steve, can you bring us up to date on this frankly horrific story?
That's right. So around 9 o'clock last night, there was a terrible plane crash where a US military helicopter, a Black Hawk helicopter, collided with a commercial aircraft flying into Ronald Reagan National Airport here in Washington, D.C. Now, Ronald Reagan Airport is just miles away from the White House. It's very centrally located, right on the Potomac River. And that is where both the plane and the helicopter crashed into. They crashed into the Potomac last night. Now, it looks like there are no survivors. That's what the authorities have said. 67 people look like they have been killed in this crash. The first crash on US soil in 17 years of an aircraft. So this really is a rare occurrence, and people are trying to figure out exactly what happened. President Trump said last night that this was a preventable accident, and it looks like the air traffic control, the pilot of the commercial aircraft, and the pilot of the military helicopter were all in communication. Again, authorities say that they were on the correct flight paths. So we're trying to figure out now in Washington exactly how this military helicopter flew into this commercial craft as it was attempting to land at Ronald Reagan National Airport. This is causing a huge amount of controversy here in Washington, trying to figure out exactly what happened. And the blame game has already begun. You know, Democrats are blaming President Trump, the Republicans are blaming the previous administration. And I think there's a real, amount of frustration at how exactly this could happen in such a secure city. You know, you see helicopters flying around Washington, D.C. all the time here in the U.S. Capitol. It's an incredibly regulated zone. And it's a difficult airport for pilots to fly into. So I think, there are lots of questions to be answered here.
OK, thank you very much. That's GB News US correspondent from Washington, Steve Edgerton. Thank you very much, Steve. Joining us now is former Royal Air Force fighter pilot Tim Davis. Tim, thank you very much for joining me this afternoon. Tim, this is obviously every pilot's nightmare come true, a horrific situation. There's so many questions about this particular incident as well. How all the pilots were in communication with the flight tower and this still happened. Can you shed a bit more light on maybe what's happened?
Yeah, so as Stephen said there are frequently used routes then for the UH-60 from the airfield across the water there, Joint Base Anacostia Bolling, and they were flying from the Pentagon, it seems, down the river, the Potomac. And of course, those routes pass underneath aircraft that are on approach to that Washington airport. And of course, normally they pass either underneath the flight path or behind them. And in this particular case, I think the helicopter was asked, are you visual with this CRJ 700 aircraft? And we don't get on the audio, we don't get the helicopter because the helicopter was on UHF and the airliner was on a VHF frequency, so frequently we can't hear the both, but the air traffic can hear the both. And it does seem that the helicopter was visual. And unfortunately, at night, lights do blend into the city, as it were. And I personally think he was looking at a different aircraft and obviously flew into the one that was on approach.
With obviously an appalling loss of life. I mean, the people in the helicopter, and obviously we think now pretty much all the passengers on board. And obviously in a very high security area. This is not far away from the White House, is it?
No, it's not. Absolutely right. It looks like they were operating from the actual Pentagon itself and doing a training flight. It doesn't mean trainees are on board. We used to do training flights the whole time in the Air Force. Most flights, of course, are not operational sorties. They're training ones. They had a role called the Gold Tops where they flew VIP as well as a utility role. So they were frequently flying senior defence officials around the place. So very experienced pilots, of course, very knowledgeable pilots. Air National Guard, so their reserve service. So, yeah, absolutely, it's a tragedy, and I have to investigate how this sort of thing happened, unfortunately. But it's obviously a very difficult time over there right now.
When you say this was a training flight, Tim, can you expand a bit on that? I mean, as you say, there were no trainees involved. So what were they training for exactly?
Okay, so helicopters come out of this joint base bombing. It was merged back in 2010 between a naval facility and an air base itself, and there's a lot of helicopters there. And those helicopters, like the presidential helicopter that picks up the president, flies him around the country, well, there's other officials that need to be flown as well. So these go into the Pentagon, or it goes into obviously Washington, other areas, and it will fly these military personnel around. It's more of a utility VIP role. So of course, when new pilots come onto a squadron, you have to train those guys up to be able to learn the route. And of course, that's obviously what they were doing, is doing a routine flight where they will go to the Pentagon, land, turn around, come back to the base, fly the approaches, have a look at that airspace, which again is some of the most heavily controlled airspace in the world, which makes this all the more shocking that something like this could possibly happen.
And Tim, on a personal basis, I mean, you've been a former Royal Air Force fighter pilot. What is it like as a pilot when you realise that, you know, I'm not sure this happened so quickly that they would have done, but when you realise that things aren't going right, that must have been absolutely chilling.
Well, I hate to say it, but, you know, death is part of the job. I'm not trying to big it up at all. We all know what you're getting into. But for those civilians, of course, in the airplane, it's not. Actually, looking at it, to tell you the truth, Dawn, what's happened is that CRJ, from what I could tell, was on a standard approach. Maybe a little bit complicated because it was doing something called a circling approach from one particular runway onto another. It had been asked, but it was all, you know, absolutely credible. There's nothing going wrong at all. But the helicopter itself, they do have this this TCAS system on board, but below 1,000 feet, where they actually crashed, I think, about 400 feet, below 1,000 feet, the TCAS system, which would tell you what to do if you were approaching another aircraft like that, it doesn't tell you what to do. It tells you the aircraft is there, but it can't give you what's called a resolution advisory, because it can't fly you into the ground. So I can't say descend or anything. So unfortunately, they may have known what was going on. But when you get into one of these situations, you know, especially if it involves some civilian aircraft and you're a military pilot, as a military pilot, you know, you'd rather take the hit than any civilian any day. It's just part of the job, unfortunately. And as I keep saying to some people, you know, that speak to me, I hate to say it, but you know what I mean? It's part of the job sometimes as a pilot.
OK, thank you very much, Tim. That's our former Royal Air Force fighter pilot, Tim Davis, bringing us up to date on, or giving us his take on the horrific crash in Washington. Now, the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has warned that 20 years from now, Britain could be run by Islamists. Has she lost the plot, though? What do you make of that one? There's lots more still to come between now and 4 o'clock. But first, let's get your news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Dawn, thank you. The top stories. Authorities in Washington, D.C. say they don't expect to find any survivors after a plane and a helicopter collided in mid-air over the Potomac River. These are the latest live shots from the US Capitol. More than 300 emergency responders are searching for survivors. 64 people, including crew, were on the American Airlines flight. 3 soldiers were on board the Black Hawk helicopter. At least 28 bodies have already been recovered. This was the plane coming into land at Reagan Washington National Airport seconds before the collision. The helicopter was on a training flight when the crash happened just before 9 p.m. local time. It's the first major US commercial air crash since 2009.
Despite all those efforts, we are now at a point where we are switching from a rescue operation to a recovery operation. At this point, we don't believe there are any survivors from this accident. And we have recovered 27 people from the plane and 1 from the helicopter.
In other news, 3 Israeli hostages and 5 Thai nationals held in Gaza have been released by the terror group Hamas and are now back in Israel. 20-year-old Agam Berger, a female soldier, was handed over to the Red Cross in Jabalia in northern Gaza earlier before being transferred to the Israeli military at the border. The Israeli military confirmed a further 7 hostages have been handed over to the Red Cross, including Savili and Gadi Moses and Arbel Yehud, along with 5 unnamed Thai nationals. Their release is not part of the official ceasefire deal. However, there were chaotic scenes in southern Gaza for the handing over of Arbel Yehud and Gadi Moses, who were surrounded. Israel is now suspending the release of 100 Palestinian prisoners following these chaotic scenes in Khan Yunis, according to multiple reports in the Israeli media. Meanwhile, Reuters reports that buses that were carrying the detainees have been told to head back to the prisons. And in other news, increasing numbers of people from the EU are abusing the common travel arrangement with Ireland to enter the UK to work illegally. GB News can exclusively reveal that many Romanians and Bulgarians in particular are avoiding border checks by crossing from the Republic, while others are simply arriving on tourist visas before finding work. GB News was given exclusive access to accompany immigration enforcement teams who have increased the number of raids they carry out by a third since Labour came into power. And those are the latest GB News headlines. For now, more from me in half an hour.
Hello again and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. It's a fine day for most of us with blue skies and any showers tending to ease during the rest of the day before further spells of wet weather arrive overnight as an occluded front moves in from the Atlantic. Now ahead of that, we do have a ridge of high pressure. The Northern Isles seeing low pressure nearby and a continuation of some showers, but elsewhere across Scotland, an early frost and some low temperatures below freezing. Likewise for northern and eastern England ahead of the rain that's moving in. Now, because of that, we'll see some hill snow for a time overnight, but most of the lying snow above about 500 metres. And it's a grey, wet and cold start to the day for many of us on Friday. Northern Ireland seeing the best of any brightness first thing. Otherwise, there'll be a lot of low cloud, outbreaks of rain, some heavy downpours for a time along the south and southeast of England, and some drizzle as well as mist and fog here and there. But Northern Ireland, Western Scotland as well, Western England and Wales starting to brighten up through the morning. Sign of things to come during the rest of the day across western parts of the country. I think for central Scotland into northern and central England as well as the east of England, we'll keep the low cloud through much of the morning, outbreaks of rain and drizzle. The heavier rain tending to ease away towards the southeast, turning drier, and in the west certainly turning brighter by the afternoon with some decent sunny spells coming through. So a pleasant afternoon for western areas, 8 to 10 Celsius with sunny spells. Not feeling quite so pleasant where we keep the low cloud across parts of the Midlands, eastern and northern England as well as central Scotland. That does tend to fizzle away into Friday night, albeit slowly. Further west, we've got clear spells for a time, so a touch of frost, but further cloud and rain comes along at times through the weekend and into the start of next week.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Alan Wright. In Manchester, the M60 anti-clockwise partly blocked after a collision on the entry slip at junction 11 for Barton and Liverpool Road, the A57. In Surrey, the M25 clockwise is partly blocked by a broken down lorry between junction 10 for the A3 and junction 11 at Chertsey. In Surrey and Woking, Victoria Way, the A320, that's still shut after storm damage between Forge End and the railway bridge turn off. And in Somerset, delays on the M5 southbound. There's a broken down lorry there and it's near to junction 21, the turn off for Weston-super-Mare and the A370. So do expect some minor delays on the approach there as well.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Welcome back. I'm Dawn Neeson on GB News. Now some breaking news for you. Sadly, another body has been recovered after the plane crash in Washington, putting the total number of victims up to 28. We will keep you updated on that breaking story as we go through the show, so please don't go anywhere. As I said, all the breaking news is here on GB News for you. Now, moving on, former Home Secretary Suella Braverman has warned that the UK could become an Islamist nation with nuclear weapons within the next 20 years. Here she is giving a lecture in Washington, D.C. yesterday.
Vice President J.D. Vance said at the National Conservative Conference, at which I also spoke in the summer here in D.C., that the UK was going to be the first Islamist nation with nuclear weapons. I don't think he was entirely joking. Is it an impossibility that 20 years from now, it will be the UK, not China or Russia, that will emerge as the greatest strategic threat to the USA? Born...
Right, OK. Has she gone for MAGA? Has she gone bonkers? Has multiculturalism failed? I mean, there's so much to unpack here, so I'm glad I got an expert to do so. Joining me now is director at the think tank Pictorial House, Mustafa Wasi. Thank you very much for joining me today,
Mustafa. Thank you so much for having me on.
This story is I'm sorry, I just think it sounds a bit mad. I'm being honest here. I'm sorry. I think Suella normally is great, very, go-getting and strong, but this doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I appreciate that entirely. I think that the comments stated by themselves are incredibly alarmist, nonsensical, and largely an attempt to sort of increasingly get attention using words like Islamism and nuclear wholesale without any bearing on reality as such. Also, it demonstrates a stunning lack of faith in our democratic institutions and civic culture here in the UK, something that has taken centuries to develop and something that a great deal of people, including the Muslims of this country, have an enormous amount of faith in. All of this is, I think, incredibly worrying and something that is hard to take very seriously, particularly coming from a serious, high-ranking politician.
Yeah, I mean, she's very high-ranking. People listen, people take notice. And you're not a lefty, are you? I mean,
no.
Raving lefty. Before your message, absolutely, is not a lefty whatsoever in any way, shape or form. Why do you think she's saying it then?
I think that it has to do with attempting to cozy up to aspects of the American right, which again further demonstrate the right wing in this country's refusal or total abnegation of sovereignty as far as governing our country by itself on its own terms with reference to our own values and our own community is concerned. I think that what they've done is over 14 years they've seen basically failure after failure of governance, much to the heartbreak of many, even on the right. And then, they look at Trump and see in 1 week, more that has been done to tackle immigration than in the last 10 years here. And so accordingly, what they've done is they're trying to ally themselves with that and portray themselves as part of this larger movement with America. It is important, nevertheless, to straighten it out that while Britain and America are incredibly close culturally and ethnically and historically, they're not, in fact, the same country. They have different concerns, different populations, different national priorities, and it is important to keep that in mind when crafting a strategy that is entirely sovereign and makes sense within the context in which we live as British.
Yeah, I mean, because, and difficult political systems as well. I mean, she's echoing what J.D. Vance said, basically. That's what he said as well. I mean, but bottom line is, do you think she might have a bit of a point as well?
No, I don't think so. I think that while it is the case that there exist troubling pathological subsections of the community, by and large, there's no reason to suggest or no reason to suspect that Islamism is taken seriously as a serious political threat in this country. As far as to the extent that Islamism is discovered, it is marked off as potentially violent. This is why, Jacob Rees-Mogg stated to my colleague the last time he was on that of the 41,000 people on the MI5 watch list, 39,000 are Islamists. This demonstrates, in fact, that Islamism is not, in fact, taken lightly in this country. We do, in fact, take it seriously. Further on, we have to make it very clear and highlight the idea that Muslims are engaged across the political spectrum here in every aspect of political life. You have, Shabana Mahmood on the left. You have, Zia Yusuf doing a fantastic job with reform on the right. You had Sajid Javid in the past. Muslim political priorities largely reflect the political priorities of the country as a whole. When polled, most Muslim, and when you ask most Muslims, what are the primary issues that govern your vote or that help dictate which way you're going to vote, most of them respond precisely the same ways in which everybody else does. They talk about the NHS, they talk about cost of living. Some of them even talk about immigration, contrary to what everybody else seems to believe. And again, in a way that accords with the rest of the country, younger Muslims tend to skew left and older Muslims tend to skew right, just like everybody else.
Which is what everybody else does.
Precisely.
Just very, very quickly, Mustafa, just one very quick. Do you think multiculturalism will ever be entirely successful in this country?
I think that multiculturalism is an incredibly loaded word, and I think that it's important instead to discuss notions of pluralism and tolerance. The idea that people should largely be left to their own devices insofar as they're not breaking the law, but that when they do in fact break the law, that they are swiftly and efficiently punished. This is a model that is expressive of British values like liberalism and pragmatism going back for the last 200 years, and we've seen it work in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, and it is only in the course of the last 20 or 30 years as a result of political inefficiency, infighting, mudslinging, and an entire and a confusion of political priority that we've started to see communal decay and tension and infighting.
Unfortunately, we've run out. I could actually talk to you for all day. Absolutely fascinating, it really is. Let me know what you think. gbnews.com/your say. Mustafa, thank you very much for joining me on that one. We have run out of time, unfortunately. We will be reflecting on the funeral of Lord John Prescott next. But first, let's take a very quick break. We'll see you soon.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Now, we're going to introduce you to Liam Wildish. Liam, well, I'd like to think he's a friend of mine because I follow him on Instagram, on TikTok there as well.
You're a big fan, aren't you?
Big fan, because there's what he does. He's a cleaner. He cleans signs. But the thing is, he's not employed by councils or whatever. He does this voluntarily. And you sort of think to yourself, well, who cleans these signs? Why have these signs been allowed to get into this terrible state of disrepair and filthiness?
So, basically, long story short, about 6 years ago, I used to be a window cleaner. In the community where I lived, I noticed all of the road signs were filthy, and I was perfectly equipped to clean them. So, basically, I cleaned the road signs as a bit of a thank you to the community and sort of make a little bit of awareness of my window cleaning business at the time. Yeah. Sort of cleans up the area, makes the road safer, and that's kind of how that started. And people found it like a really satisfying sort of approach. So that sort of led on to today of a video in cleaning the dirty road signs and making sort of satisfying content with it as well.
What is the equipment? What have we got here?
So this is a water-fed pole system connected to a backpack, which is what feeds the water through the end of the brush there. It's perfectly equipped to basically remove this green dirty, it's like a mildew build-up that you get on the signs. Yeah. As you can see, this is like extremely effective at removing so.
So GB News viewers, if they spot a particularly grisly sign in their area, then they can get in touch.
They can do, yeah.
And Liam Wildish, the sign guy, can sort you out.
if you find Liam the sign guy online, drop me a message, let me know, and I'll add you to my list of places.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, isn't it? Because the failure is...
You're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff. Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood. So join me on Jubes & Co. weeknights at 6 p.m, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
There you are. Welcome back. I'm not Martin Daubney. I'm Dawn Neeson, but this is definitely GB News. Now, former Prime Ministers Tony Blair and Gordon Brown have paid tribute to Lord John Prescott as they attended his funeral at Hull Minster today. Let's cross to Anna Riley at Hull Minster. Oh, OK, here she is.
Oh, yes, hundreds of...
Yes, yeah. Oh, thank you. OK, bring us up to date on the story.
Yes, hundreds of mourners turned out here this afternoon, Dawn, to pay tribute to the late Lord John Prescott, who passed away at the age of 86 in November last year after living with Alzheimer's disease. He was the Labour Hull East MP here in Hull for 40 years between 1970 and 2010, and he was also known as serving as Deputy Prime Minister in Tony Blair's cabinet. Tony Blair gave a lengthy eulogy in which he said that Prescott was the guardian of the party's conscience, a working-class boy from a small Welsh town who rose to the highest ranks of the land by merit, by graft, by greatness of courage and character. And certainly there were many senior figures from the Labour Party, both past and present, who came here to pay their respects, including Gordon Brown, Sir Keir Starmer and Deputy Labour leader Angela Rayner, reflecting on John Prescott's long life and also his sense of humour, his working class roots, and the things that he brought to Hull and the wider nation. The former Labour Prime Minister Tony Blair also said that Prescott will be forever memorialised by the incident in which he punched a man who threw an egg on him in 2001. And his sense of humour really was reflected upon in the service as well. In fact, with 2 Jaguars that were part of the funeral cortege that were actually parked outside the Minster, of course in reference to that nickname that he had, Johnny Two Jags. So certainly today, a day of remembrance for Lord John Prescott, memorised here today.
Thank you very much. It's Anna Riley at Holminster there. And by the way, it's 2 Jags because he was looking after his wife's hair. That's a good husband for you in my book. OK, now the Princess of Wales is following in the footsteps of her mother-in-law, Princess Diana, as she becomes the patron of the T. Harman Children's Hospice. So to tell us more about this is our royal correspondent, Cameron Walker. Cameron.
Heart supporting children with life-limiting illnesses and, of course, their families. The Princess making a surprise visit today to the hospice near Cardiff. The King also used to be patron before he ascended the throne in 2022. And the Princess met 4-year-old Maggie, whose brother Felix is actually supported by the hospice. And she actually got her hand painted by the Princess of Wales. So take a look at this clip.
Do it together. Yeah. Would you like me to paint your hand? And then you can do it? Okay, tell me if it tickles. Is it ticklish? I'm assuming a thick layer is good. Yeah, not too thick. Not too thick. There's obviously a technique. Ready? You're going to turn it around. Really hand out straight. That's it. Ready? Steady. Go. Keep those fingers nice and straight. Do. Ready? Should we lift it up again? Yay!
Very cute. The Princess also took part in a musical therapy session. She actually organised for lots of musical instruments to be donated to the hospice to coincide with her visit. She also visited a Welsh textiles manufacturer as well, promoting Welsh businesses. Of course, this is all part of her gradual return to public duties following the announcement that she's in remission for cancer.
What a lovely report. Thank you very much, Cameron. OK, and more coming up. Our man Mark White joins an immigration raid.
Thanks.
I'm Dawn Neeson. This is GBNews, Britain's news channel. You don't want to go anywhere. We've got a really, really packed show coming up for you. So time to put the kettle on while you have a look at what that weather's doing for you. Fingers crossed it's not too bad. See you soon.
Despite the morning rain, it'll be a nice, warm, cosy day ahead. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. It's a fine day for most of us with blue skies and any showers tending to ease during the rest of the day before further spells of wet weather arrive overnight as an occluded front moves in from the Atlantic. Now ahead of that we do have a ridge of high pressure. The Northern Isles seeing low pressure nearby and a continuation of some showers, but elsewhere across Scotland, an early frost and some low temperatures below freezing. Likewise for northern and eastern England ahead of the rain that's moving in. Now, because of that, we'll see some hill snow for a time overnight, but most of the lying snow above about 500 metres. And it's a grey, wet and cold start to the day for many of us on Friday. Northern Ireland seeing the best of any brightness first thing. Otherwise, there'll be a lot of low cloud, outbreaks of rain, some heavy downpours for a time along the south and southeast of England, and some drizzle as well as mist and fog here and there. But Northern Ireland, Western Scotland as well, Western England and Wales starting to brighten up through the morning. Sign of things to come during the rest of the day across western parts of the country. I think for central Scotland into northern and central England as well as the east of England, we'll keep the low cloud through much of the morning, outbreaks of rain and drizzle. The heavier rain tending to ease away towards the southeast, turning drier, and in the west certainly turning brighter by the afternoon with some decent sunny spells coming through. So a pleasant afternoon for western areas, 8 to 10 Celsius with sunny spells. Not feeling quite so pleasant where we keep the low cloud across parts of the Midlands, eastern and northern England as well as central Scotland. That does tend to fizzle away into Friday night, albeit slowly. Further west, we've got clear spells for a time, so a touch of frost, but further cloud and rain comes along at times through the weekend and into the start of next week.
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Alan Wright. In Manchester, the M60 anti-clockwise is partly blocked after a collision at junction 11 for Barton and the A57. In Essex, delays on the M25 anti-clockwise. That's partly blocked after a collision. It's happened just before junction 31 for Lakeside and Purfleet, with queues back through the Dartford tunnels towards junction 2 for the A2. In Wiltshire, the M4 eastbound is blocked after a collision. That's happened between junction 16 for Swindon West and 15 for Swindon East. And in Somerset, the M5 southbound is partly blocked by a broken down lorry, and that's near junction 21 for Weston and the A370 turnoff.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
This is the final week to grab your chance to win our biggest cash prize so far, £50,000 in tax-free cash. How would you react if you won?
We won 25,000. I'd say don't hesitate, do it. If you're not in it, you've got no chance of winning it.
Don't miss out as lines close on Friday. For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more.
Whether it's breaking royal news,
Will, please bring us up to date.
or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons,
Very, very curious.
we bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good afternoon. It's 4 o'clock. Yes, it's 4 o'clock indeed. Welcome to the Martin Daubney Show on GB News, broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster and all across the UK. I'm Dawn Neeson, just in case you spotted the subtle difference. OK, the headlines this hour. And we don't believe there are any survivors. That's what US officials say after an American Airlines plane collided with a helicopter above Washington, D.C. We're expecting to hear from Donald Trump in a live press conference coming up very soon, so you don't want to miss that one. And GB News exclusive as our man Mark White joins an immigration raid to find out how many are migrants exploiting an EU loophole to enter Britain?
What visa have you got? Work visa?
So 6 months, yeah.
6 months. Visit visa?
Yes.
Ah, okay. Right. You're not allowed to work with that, okay? So at the moment, okay, you're under arrest.
So will Labour finally smash the gangs? Channel migrants who put lives at risk will face up to 5 years in jail under a new border security bill. But is that enough of a deterrent? GB News will be speaking with the Home Secretary very shortly. And Reform UK take the lead in a new poll. They've been ranked 4 points ahead of Labour and 6 points ahead of the Tories. So could Nigel Farage really be your next Prime Minister? So thank you for joining me this afternoon. The sharp-eyed amongst you might have spotted that I'm not actually Martin Daubney. He actually doesn't normally wear this much lipstick. I say normally, maybe at weekends, he possibly does. I couldn't comment. But this show isn't about Martin. It's not about me. It is indeed about you. So join in our conversation. Anything we're talking about, anything you want to talk about, this is your show. Never forget that. Send your views and post comments by visiting gbnews.com/your say. But first, let's get those news headlines with the very wonderful Tatiana Sanchez.
Dawn, thank you very much. The top stories. Authorities in Washington, D.C. say they don't expect to find any survivors after a plane and helicopter collided in mid-air over the Potomac River. These are the latest live shots from the US Capitol. More than 300 emergency responders are searching for survivors. 64 people, including crew, were on the American Airlines flight. 3 soldiers were on board the Black Hawk helicopter. At least 28 bodies have already been recovered. This was the plane coming into land at Reagan Washington National Airport seconds before the collision. The helicopter was on a training flight when the crash happened just before 9 p.m. local time. It's the first major US commercial air crash since 2009.
Despite all those efforts, we are now at a point where we are switching from a rescue operation to a recovery operation. At this point, we don't believe there are any survivors from this accident. And we have recovered 27 people from the plane and 1 from the helicopter.
In other news, 3 Israeli hostages and 5 Thai nationals held in Gaza have been released by the terror group Hamas and are now back in Israel. 20-year-old Agam Berger, a female soldier, was handed over to the Red Cross in Jabalia in northern Gaza earlier before being transferred to the Israeli military at the border. The Israeli military confirmed a further 7 hostages have been handed over to the Red Cross, including Savili and Gadi Moses and Arbel Yahud, along with 5 unnamed Thai nationals. Their release is not part of the official ceasefire deal. However, there were chaotic scenes in southern Gaza for the handing over of Arbel Yahud and Gadi Moses, who were surrounded. Israel is now suspending the release of 100 Palestinian prisoners following those scenes in Khan Yunis, according to multiple reports in Israeli media. Meanwhile, Reuters reports that buses that were carrying the detainees have been told to head back to the prisons. In other news, increasing numbers of people from the EU are abusing the common travel arrangement with Ireland to enter the UK to work illegally. GB News can exclusively reveal that many Romanians and Bulgarians in particular are avoiding border checks by crossing from the Republic, while others are simply arriving on tourist visas before finding work. GB News was given exclusive access to accompany immigration enforcement teams who've increased the number of raids they carry out by a third since Labour came to power. And some breaking news just in. 62-year-old Martin John Macaulay has appeared in court today, charged with murdering 3 RUC officers in Northern Ireland in an IRA bomb attack near Lurgan in County Armagh in 1982. More on this breaking story as soon as we get it. Elsewhere, the Bishop of Liverpool has resigned after allegations of sexual assault and harassment were made against him. The Right Reverend Dr. John Balath said he had decided to retire without any admission of fault or liability to avoid the issue becoming a distraction. It comes after Channel 4 News reported one woman had accused the bishop of kissing her without consent and groping her, and another woman accused him of sexual harassment. He continues to deny any wrongdoing. Water bills are set to rise in England and Wales by an average of £123 per household from April. It means the typical bill will rise by 26% from £480 per year to £603. The industry body Water UK says the extra money will fund infrastructure projects and will provide help for struggling customers, but consumer groups are warning the rise means more households will fall into debt. And retail crime is now at an all-time high, with more than 2,000 incidents reported a day. Last year, more than 70 incidents alone included use of a weapon, with double reported in the previous year. Thefts have reached 20 million incidents per year, costing retailers £2.2 billion annually. Those are the latest headlines for now. More from me in half an hour.
Thank you very much, Tatiana. Now, as we wait for Donald Trump to take to the stage to address the US plane crash, let's speak to GB News US correspondent from Washington, D.C., Steve Edgington, to bring us up to date on any details of the plane crash. Steve, thank you very much for joining us. Can you bring us up to date on what's been happening this afternoon with you?
Yes, that's right. So authorities at the moment are just trying to figure out exactly how this plane crash happened. Late last night, about 9 p.m, a military helicopter, a Black Hawk helicopter, crashed into a civilian aircraft as it was flying into Ronald Reagan National Airport here in Washington, D.C. And it looks like everyone involved in the crash has sadly died. That's 67 people. And authorities now, as I said, are just trying to figure out exactly what happened. It looks like the communication between the air traffic control, the pilot of the civilian aircraft, and the pilot of the military helicopter was fine. And the air traffic control actually warned the Black Hawk helicopter to pass by the civilian plane as it was trying to land into Ronald Reagan National Airport. So it's a bit of a mystery at the moment as to exactly what's happened. Perhaps President Trump, who's just about to speak at a press conference, will give a bit more details. But as of today, as of this morning in Washington, D.C., we don't really know what's happened. We know the flight paths were followed perfectly. It looked like, the pilot of the commercial aircraft, he was very experienced. We know that he's been flying planes for more than 6 years. And the Black Hawk helicopter was actually on a training exercise at the time. There's lots and lots of military aircraft flying around Washington, D.C. There's lots of military bases around the U.S. Capitol. And obviously, you have this airport that's right in the center of Washington, D.C., a bit like City Airport in London, just a few miles away from the White House. It's right on the Potomac River. So there's always a potential for collisions and for crashes between the military aircraft and the commercial aircraft. And this is actually, I don't believe this is completely unprecedented. I think more than 40 years ago, a similar incident happened. But this is the first crash or aircraft crash on US soil of an American plane in 17 years. So this is an incredibly rare moment and a very tragic moment here in DC, as authorities just desperately trying to figure out exactly what went wrong here.
Steve, as we're speaking to you, we can see the platform ready for Donald Trump to make his announcement. So we will go to that as soon as he makes his appearance. Steve, obviously it's a very sensitive time in America with you've got a new president. This is right near to the White House. Was there any worries about terrorism at all when this first happened?
I think authorities knew almost immediately that this was not a terrorist attack. This had no terrorist connections. Obviously, there are, very, very heightened security protocols in place around Washington's airspace. So, for example, flying drones is illegal, and the airspace is usually incredibly tightly controlled for the very reason that you speculated on there. You have to remember in September 2001. Of course, there was an aircraft that crashed into the Pentagon, which is just or less than a mile, I'd say, from Ronald Reagan National Airport and the Potomac, where this crash happened today. So, security fears are, security is very, very tight here in Washington, D.C. Almost, I think, over a week ago, Donald Trump was, he was inaugurated here in Washington, and security was just on another level. The whole city was shut down. And Washington, it's a very, very secure place. So they are very concerned about terrorist attacks. But I think in this instant, it looks like to be a terrible accident and a tragedy, really. As I said, 67 people seem to have lost their lives. Last night, people were searching, hundreds of people were searching in the Potomac River with freezing conditions. Parts of the Potomac was frozen over, desperately trying to find survivors. And authorities say, actually, unfortunately, there have been no survivors from this terrible incident. Both the 3 military personnel in the Black Hawk helicopter and the 64 civilians on the civilian aircraft appear to have died. Details of people on the aircraft as well have come out recently. We know that the US figure skating, ice skating team, many of those people were on the aircraft, and also the Russian figure skating team. They're flying from Kansas into Washington, D.C., and they've just been at some kind of competition. And yeah, this is a real tragedy. I think it'll be interesting to see what Donald Trump says in a few minutes' time.
Indeed. So by the sounds of it, there's quite a few young people on board that flight.
Yeah, it looks like it. We've heard from family members of the people who were on the aircraft this morning. They are just absolutely desperate to hear of any news, any positive news. We've seen pictures of some of the figure skaters, and you're right, they're in their early 20s. It's very, very sad, and this is a very rare moment. And for Americans, this is a very emotional time. It seems bizarre that this could have happened in the richest country in the world, in its capital city. And the technology here, to regulate the skies is incredibly advanced, but also complicated. And Ronald Reagan Airport, where this crash happened, is quite a complex airport for pilots to fly into because of all the regulations to do with the military aircraft flying around. I live in Washington, D.C. I see these low-flying helicopters, very regularly flying all across the capital city, across the White House and so on. So it just seems, it's both strange, but also, not particularly surprising if you think about it, that this crash happened. Something obviously has happened, perhaps a human error. I think the initial blame looks to be on the military aircraft, though we, again, don't know exactly what happened. Certainly, we've been told that the pilot of the commercial aircraft, as he was flying in to Ronald Reagan last night, was on the correct flight path. It appears that the military helicopter, the Black Hawk helicopter, was also on the correct flight path. So again, it seems very strange as to what has happened here. They were all in communication. The military aircraft was warned about the commercial aircraft coming into landing. So why they didn't get out of the way is an important question. And President Trump actually last night was speculating about this. He tweeted out saying that this was a preventable tragedy. And he was questioning exactly why the Black Hawk helicopter couldn't see the plane in front of it. There were clear skies last night. This happened at 9 p.m. It was dark, and there were lots of lights on the aircraft, but also on the landing strip in Ronald Reagan National Airport. So I think a lot of questions from aviation experts as to exactly how this happened. In the modern age, this is just an incredibly rare occurrence, and it shouldn't be happening. So, the fact it has happened has led to the tragic deaths of dozens of people, both from the United States, but also from Russia. As I said earlier, you've got that Russian figure skating team. The Kremlin has put out a statement late last night, sort of commemorating those people who died. So, yeah, I think this is a real tragedy, and we just need answers.
Indeed, Steve. And what can we gather from what we think Trump is going to say? I know it's when he put his tweet out, he tweeted in capital letters, so like shouting that, whose fault this is, questions need to be answered. Of course, questions need to be answered, but he sounded from that particular post very, very angry about the situation.
I think he is very angry, and you have to remember he only has just become president. This is the first major tragedy of his second administration. This is a crisis that his administration are having to deal with very early on. The defense secretary was just sworn in last week. The transport secretary was sworn in, I think, yesterday or within the last few days. So this is, it's a difficult moment for the Trump team to try and deal with this emergency. President Trump has put out several statements about this, crash already. Last night, as I said, he put out a very angry statement asking, how could this have happened? This was preventable. How could the aircraft, not have seen the plane coming into land? But he's also put out a more conciliatory statement, a more kind of mellow statement as well later on this morning. Obviously, this is, terrible that this has happened. And I think President Trump, in his normal style, he's quite a brash politician. He will demand answers. He will be very, very angry that this was allowed to happen. And he'll be questioning exactly who was responsible for this. Was this the pilot of the military aircraft? Was this the air traffic control? Was this some kind of bureaucratic screw up? We just don't know at this moment in time. Perhaps the president will have more details, which he'll come to us soon with. But I think he is rightly, would be very, very angry. And we've seen a bit of a blame game here in America this morning already. The bodies are barely even sort of cold, and we've seen Democrats and Republicans blaming each other. Democrats blaming President Trump for this disaster. Republicans saying, well, actually, we've only been on charge for a couple of weeks, so this is actually on you and on your watch. It's quite sad to see that, really. And President Trump has also had, come under attack for his statement last night, expressing his anger. The New York Times and the liberal media here criticizing President Trump for using that kind of brash language describing this crash. But of course, I think from his perspective, he is incredibly angry that this was allowed to have happened, and he wants answers. He wants to know exactly how this could happen. I think behind me right now there is actually a helicopter. You can see, I don't know if you can see that behind me, but I'd be searching between them, and you can see, incredibly low flying aircraft all over Washington. I've seen this morning lots and lots of rescue operations, people trying to find survivors in the river. The freezing cold conditions have made that incredibly difficult. And I think President Trump, he will want to know exactly what has happened here, as all Americans do, and particularly the families of those who unfortunately died in this crash last night.
Steve, thank you very much. That's a US correspondent in Washington, D.C. for us. Steve Edgington at the site of that horrific crash, where we now know that we are not going to find any survivors. We are still waiting for Donald Trump, who is going to come on and give a press conference about this situation. But while we're waiting for that, you can see on your screens there the platform waiting for him. So as soon as he does make an appearance, we will go live to that press conference. But while we're waiting for that, let's speak to a former airline pilot, Emma Henderson. Emma, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Emma, what do you make of what's happened in Washington? A complete horror story.
Absolutely, everybody's worst nightmare. It's the thing that you always go to work hoping isn't going to happen to you, and you trust that it's not going to because of all the procedures that are in place to stop these things from happening. But of course, on this occasion, something has gone wrong, and it's the worst possible outcome. So a very dark day indeed for aviation and for all of us as pilots. Our thoughts with our colleagues that we've lost, whether we know them or not. It's still a deep tragedy, and we all want to know what happened.
And Emma, from a complete layman's point of view, it seems like it obviously happened very fast and it was dark. We know that, but it's like that. They were both pilots of the helicopter and the jet were in communication with the control tower, so they knew one another were there. They had their instructions. They could see one another. I mean, they were literally so close. Obviously, they could see one another. So, what do you think went wrong?
Well, it's not always as easy as you might think to see other traffic, particularly at night. We do know now that the crew of the helicopter were wearing night vision goggles, and that may or may not have helped them to see whether or not they helped them to see the correct aircraft or not remains to be found out in the subsequent investigation. It's not always that easy, though, to see a helicopter moving at night because you're relying really on the lights that are flashing on that aircraft as much as anything. And when you think about them putting that against a dark cityscape with lots of twinkling lights in the background, they were at 400 feet. So the traffic collision avoidance systems that are normally are in place on commercial airliners, they give an oral warning if traffic is approaching that is seen as being a threat to your aircraft. But that oral warning is inhibited below 500 feet. So some of the information that you would normally expect to have higher up, for example, is removed. You're working hard, you're on approach. Absolutely, they will have been listening out to communication between air traffic control and the helicopter, but we don't know yet if they were able to hear a response from the helicopter, and that seems to be one of the missing pieces of the jigsaw at the moment. So the helicopter was instructed to pass behind the CRJ, which was the plane, and we don't know yet whether or not that was acknowledged, because of course they may have been talking on a different frequency.
Yes, of course. And Emma, you know, we know that some airports are... Oh, right, OK, Emma, thank you very much. We are now going to go live to Donald Trump's press conference. Here he is.
For the victims and their families, please. Thank you very much. I speak to you this morning in an hour of anguish for our nation. Just before 9 p.m. last night, an American Airlines regional jet carrying 60 passengers and 4 crew collided with an Army Black Hawk helicopter carrying 3 military service members over the Potomac River in Washington, D.C., while on final approach to Reagan National Airport. Both aircraft crashed instantly and were immediately submerged into the icy waters of the Potomac. Real tragedy. The massive search and rescue mission was underway throughout the night, leveraging every asset at our disposal, and I have to say the local, state, federal, military, including the United States Coast Guard in particular, they've done a phenomenal job. So quick, so fast, it was mobilized immediately. The work has now shifted to a recovery mission. Sadly, there are no survivors. This was a dark and excruciating night in our nation's capital and in our nation's history, and a tragedy of terrible proportions. As one nation, we grieve for every precious soul that has been taken from us so suddenly, and we are a country of really, we are in mourning. This is really shaken a lot of people, including people, very sadly, from other nations who were on the flight. For the family members back in Wichita, Kansas, here in Washington, D.C., and throughout the United States, and in Russia, we have a Russia contingent, some very talented people, unfortunately, were on that plane. Very, very, very sorry about that. Whose loved ones were aboard the passenger jet. We can only begin to imagine the agony that you're all feeling. Nothing worse. On behalf of the First Lady, myself, and 340 million Americans, our hearts are shattered alongside yours, and our prayers are with you now and in the days to come. We'll be working very, very diligently in the days to come. We're here for you to wipe away the tears and to offer you our devotion, our love, and our support. There's great support. In moments like this, the differences between Americans fade to nothing compared to the bonds of affection and loyalty that unite us all, both as Americans and even as nations. We are one family, and today we are all heartbroken. We're all searching for answers. That icy, icy Potomac, it was a cold, cold night, cold water. We're all overcome with the grief for many who have so tragically perished, will no longer be with us. Together we take solace in the knowledge that their journey ended not in the cold waters of the Potomac, but in the warm embrace of a loving God. We do not know what led to this crash, but we have some very strong opinions and ideas, and I think we'll probably state those opinions now. because over the years I've watched as things like this happen, and they say, well, we're always investigating, and then investigation 3 years later, they announce it. We think we have some pretty good ideas, but we'll find out how this disaster occurred, and we'll ensure that nothing like this ever happens again. The FAA and the NTSB and the U.S. military will be carrying out a systematic and comprehensive investigation. Our new Secretary of Transportation, Sean Duffy, his second day on the job when that happened. It's a rough one. We'll be working tirelessly. He's a great gentleman. The whole group these are great people, and they are working tirelessly to figure out exactly what happened. We will state certain opinions, however. I'm also immediately appointing an acting commissioner to the FAA, Christopher Rocheleau, a 22-year veteran of the agency, highly respected. Christopher, thank you very much. Appreciate it. We must have only the highest standards for those who work in our aviation system. I changed the Obama standards from very mediocre at best to extraordinary. You remember that. Only the highest aptitude, they have to be the highest intellect and psychologically superior people were allowed to qualify for air traffic controllers. That was not so prior to getting there. When I arrived in 2016, I made that change very early on because I always felt this was a job that, and other jobs too, but this was a job that had to be superior intelligence. And we didn't really have that, and we had it. And then when I left office and Biden took over, he changed them back to lower than ever before. I put safety first. Obama, Biden, and the Democrats put policy first. And they put politics at a level that nobody's ever seen, because this was the lowest level. Their policy was horrible, and their politics was even worse. So as you know, last week, long before the crash, I signed an executive order restoring our highest standards for air traffic controllers and other important jobs throughout the country. So it was very interesting. About a week ago, almost upon entering office, I signed something last week that was an executive order, very powerful, on restoring the highest standards of air traffic controllers and others, by the way. Then my administration will set the highest possible bar for aviation safety. We have to have our smartest people. It doesn't matter what they look like, how they speak, who they are. It matters intellect, talent, the word talent. They have to be talented, naturally talented geniuses. You can't have regular people doing that job. They won't be able to do it. But we'll restore faith in American air travel. I'll have more to say about that. I do want to point out that various articles that appeared prior to my entering office, and here's one. The FAA's diversity push includes focus on hiring people with severe intellectual and psychiatric disabilities. That is amazing. And then it says FAA says people with severe disabilities are most underrepresented segment of the workforce, and they want them in, and they want them, they can be air traffic controllers. I don't think so. This was in January 14th, so that was a week before I entered office. They put a big push to put diversity into the FAA's program. Then another article, the Federal Aviation Administration, this was before I got to office, recently, second term. The FAA is actively recruiting workers who suffer severe intellectual disabilities, psychiatric problems, and other mental and physical conditions under a diversity and inclusion hiring initiative spelled out on the agency's website. Can you imagine? These are people that are, I mean, actually, their lives are shortened because of the stress that they have. Brilliant people have to be in those positions, and their lives are actually shortened, very substantially shortened, because of the stress, where you have many, many planes coming into one target, and you need a very special talent and a very special genius to be able to do it. Targeted disabilities are those disabilities that the federal government, as a matter of policy, has identified for special emphasis in recruitment and hiring. The FAA's website states they include hearing, vision, missing extremities, partial paralysis, complete paralysis, epilepsy, severe intellectual disability, psychiatric disability, and dwarfism all qualify for the position of a controller of airplanes pouring into our country, pouring into a little spot, a little dot on the map, a little runway. The initiative is part of the FAA's Diversity and Inclusion Hiring Plan. Think of that. The initiative is part of the FAA's Diversity and Inclusion Hiring Plan, which says diversity is integral to achieving FAA's mission of ensuring safe and efficient travel. I don't think so. I don't think so. I think it's just the opposite. The FAA website shows that the agency's guidance on diversity hiring were last updated on March 23rd of 22. They wanted to make it even more so. And then I came in, and I assume maybe this is the reason. The FAA, which is overseen by Secretary Pete Buttigieg, a real winner. That guy's a real winner. Do you know how badly everything's run since he's run this Department of Transportation? He's a disaster. He was a disaster as a mayor. He ran his city into the ground, and he's a disaster now. He's just got a good line of bullshit. The Department of Transportation, his government agency charged with regulating civil aviation. Well, he runs it, 45,000 people, and he's run it right into the ground with his diversity. So I had to say that it's terrible. Then it's a group within the FAA, another story, determined that the workforce was too white, that they had concerted efforts to get the administration to change that and to change it immediately. This was in the Obama administration just prior to my getting there. And we took care of African Americans, Hispanic Americans. We took care of everybody at levels that nobody's ever seen before. It's one of the reasons I won. But they actually came out with a directive, too white. And we want the people that are competent. But now we mourn and we pray and would like to ask all Americans to join me in a moment of silence as we ask God to watch over those who have lost their lives and bring comfort to the loved ones. And I just want to say God bless everyone in this room. This has been a terrible, very short period of time. We'll get to the bottom of it. So we all saw the same thing. We've seen it many times. I've had the honor of hearing tapes. Tapes are scary, very scary tapes. You had a airliner coming in, American Airlines. He was doing everything right. He was on track. He was the same track as everybody else. They came in. It's probably the same track as they've had for 25 years or more. He's coming in the path. And for some reason, he had a helicopter that was at the same height, obviously when they hit, but pretty much the same height, and going at an angle that was unbelievably bad. When the air traffic controller said, do you see, he was talking about, do you see him? But there was very little time left when that was stated. And then also, he said, follow him in. And then almost immediately after that, seconds after that, there was the crash that took place. Well, you follow him in, that means like everything's fine, follow him in. You had a pilot problem from the standpoint of the helicopter, because it was visual. It was a very clear night. It was cold, but clear, and clear as you could be. The American Airlines plane had lights blazing. They had all of their landing lights on. I could see it from the Kennedy Center tape. We had a tape up on the Kennedy Center. That seems to be the primary. Thus far, I'm sure we'll see other tapes because it's such an area where there are a lot of cameras looking up into the air, into space. So we'll probably see many other shots of it before too much time goes by. But we had a situation where you had a helicopter that had the ability to stop. I have helicopters. You can stop a helicopter very quickly. It had the ability to go up or down. It had the ability to turn. And the turn it made was not the correct turn, obviously. It did somewhat the opposite of what it was told. We don't know that that would have been the difference because the timing was so tight. It was so little. There was so little time to think. But what you did have is you had vision. The helicopter had vision of the plane because you had vision of it all the way, perfect vision of it all the way from at Kennedy Center where the tape was taken. And for some reason, there weren't adjustments made. Again, you could have slowed down the helicopter substantially. You could have stopped the helicopter. You could have gone up. You could have gone down. You could have gone straight up, straight down. You could have turned. You could have done a million different maneuvers. For some reason, it just kept going and then made a slight turn at the very end, and by that time it was too late. They shouldn't have been at the same height, because if it was at the same height, you could have gone under it or over it, and nobody realized, or they didn't say that it's at the same height. At the same height, it still wouldn't have been great, but you would have missed it by quite a bit. Could have been 1,000 feet higher. It could have been 200 feet lower, but it was exactly at the same height, and somebody should have been able to point that out. So all of this is going to be studied, but it just seems to me, from a couple of words that I like to use, the words common sense, some really bad things happened, and some things happened that shouldn't have happened. So you had a helicopter going in an identical direction. You had a helicopter that was at the exact same height as somebody going in essentially the opposite direction. You had a plane that was following a track, which is a track that every other plane followed. And I don't imagine, I know I've heard today that they might have been following the preceding plane, which was pretty close, but not that close, the preceding plane. But you wouldn't have even been able to see that because of the direction that the helicopter was coming in at. So you had a confluence of bad decisions that were made, and you have people that lost their lives, violently lost their lives. We're going to take a few questions. I'd like to ask our new Secretary of Transportation to say a few words. Sean Duffy, great gentleman, just started. It's not your fault, and I know you agree with me very strongly on intellect and even psychological well-being of the air traffic control. It's such an important position, and I think I can't emphasize stronger. I changed it when I first ran in 2016. I changed it. We had the highest standard that you could have, and then they changed it back. That was Biden, to a standard I read it to you. That was from one of your papers. One of the people in this room actually wrote that. And then I changed it back a few days ago. And unfortunately, that was, we'll see. We don't know that necessarily it's even the controller's fault. But one thing we do know, there was a lot of vision, and people should have been able to see that, you know, at what point do you stop? At what point do you say, wow, that plane's getting a little bit close? So this is a tragedy that should not have happened. Please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I would just note the President's leadership has been remarkable during this crisis. We have had a whole of government response, local, state, federal. And when you see that kind of cooperation, it begins with the leadership in this body. So thank you for that, Mr. President. You make our jobs a lot easier. You made an important point that when we deal with safety, we can only accept the best and the brightest in positions of safety that impact the lives of our loved ones, our family members. And I think you make a really important point on that, Mr. President. That is the motto of your presidency: the best and the brightest, the most intelligent coming into these spaces. I want to take a moment and extend my condolences to the families of the loved ones. We commit to them that we are going to get to the bottom of this investigation, not in 3 years, not in 4 years, but as quickly as possible, with the NTSB, who is here today, as well as the FAA. What happened yesterday shouldn't have happened. It should not have happened. And when Americans take off in airplanes, they should expect to land at their destination. That didn't happen yesterday. That's unacceptable. And so we will not accept excuses. We will not accept passing the buck. We are going to take responsibility at the Department of Transportation and the FAA to make sure we have the reforms that have been dictated by President Trump in place to make sure that these mistakes do not happen again. And again, I want to thank you for your leadership, Mr. President, and I appreciate the confidence you placed in me. Thank you.
Pete would like to say something.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Again, I want to echo what the Transportation Secretary said about your leadership. From the moment we found out about this, we were in contact with the White House trying to determine exactly what
Thank you for joining us this afternoon. If you have just joined us, we are live in America listening to Donald Trump give a press conference on that horrific plane crash in Washington, D.C. overnight. We have heard from Donald Trump talking about how basically, obviously, one nation we grieve, we are a country in mourning. Our thoughts are with those families. We learned that many of the victims are young people, and there was also victims from Russia on there. He's now talking about some very strong lines coming from Trump this afternoon. Obviously, the investigation is still going on, but Trump says he has ideas and theories about what happened. And as I said, he acknowledges the investigation is also going on. I think most astonishingly, he also made political points by saying, I'm putting safety first, whereas Obama and Biden put politics first. Trump said he signed an executive order only last week. We know he signed a flurry of them, didn't he? Higher standards for air traffic controllers, basically having a go at the diversity, equality and inclusion in the hiring process that has been part of the Federal Air Force, basically to hire people that were woke, to use his words. The Federal Aviation Authority, it says in their manifesto, severe disabilities can be air traffic controllers. Trump says, I don't think so. Also, severe intellectual defects. We will accept you as air traffic controllers. That's what the Federal Aviation Authority said. Trump once again says, no, we need brilliant people in this position, nothing less.
Thank you, Mr. President.
OK, I think we have J.D. Vance. Now we'll go back to live to this conference.
Secretary of Transportation and of Defense. There really was a whole of government response. We were all on the phone. We were all communicating yesterday, trying to get to the bottom of this immediately, but also try to communicate with the American people about what happened. Something the president said that I think bears re-emphasizing, which is that when you don't have the best standards in who you're hiring, it means on the one hand, you're not getting the best people in government, but on the other hand, it puts stresses on the people who are already there. And I think that is a core part of what President Trump is going to bring and has already brought to Washington, D.C. is we want to hire the best people because we want the best people at air traffic control, and we want to make sure we have enough people at air traffic control who are actually competent to do the job. If you go back to just some of the headlines over the past 10 years, you have many hundreds of people suing the government because they would like to be air traffic controllers, but they were turned away because of the color of their skin. That policy ends under Donald Trump's leadership because safety is the first priority of our aviation industry. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, on DEI and the claims that you've made, are you saying this crash was somehow caused and the result of diversity hiring? And what evidence have you seen to support these claims?
It just could have been. We have a high standard. We've had a much higher standard than anybody else. And there are things where you have to go by brain power. You have to go by psychological quality. And psychological quality is a very important element of it. These are various very powerful tests that we put to use, and they were terminated by Biden. And Biden went by a standard that's the exact opposite. So we don't know, but we do know that you had two planes at the same level. You had a helicopter and a plane. That shouldn't have happened. And we'll see. We're going to look into that, and we're going to see. But certainly for an air traffic controller, we want the brightest, the smartest, the sharpest. We want somebody that's psychologically superior, and that's what we're going to have. Yeah. Yeah, please, go ahead.
Mr. President, you mentioned at the top of the briefing that there were several Russian nationals on the flight.
Yes.
Will the U.S. government be willing to facilitate the transfer of their remains, considering
Yes, we
the
will.
fact there is no direct air travel between the two countries?
We've already been in contact with Russia, and the answer is yes, we will facilitate. Yes. Please, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. The situation in the Democratic Republic of the Congo is getting worse, even though President John Lorenzo has been mediating the conflict between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of the Congo because he wants to bring peace and stability. The situation is really bad right now. I want to hear from Ms. President if you have any plan in the future to bring peace in the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
You're asking me a question about Rwanda, and it is a very serious problem, I agree, but I don't think it's appropriate right now to talk about it, but it is a very serious problem.
We don't even yet know the names of the 67 people who were killed, and you are blaming Democrats and DEI policies and air traffic control and seemingly the member of the U.S. military who was flying that Black Hawk helicopter. Don't you think you're getting ahead of the investigation right now?
No, I don't think so at all. I don't think with the names of the people, you mean the names of the people that are on the plane? You think that's going to make a difference?
Does it comfort their families
They
to
are
hear you
a
blaming
group of
DEI
people that have lost their lives. If you want a list of the names, we can give you that. We'll be giving that very soon. We're in coordination with American Airlines. We're in coordination very strongly, obviously, with the military. But I think that's not a very smart question.
But are you
I'm
blaming,
surprised coming from you.
Are you blaming
please.
Thank you, President Trump. Thank you for being here. Based on your analysis so far, do you have a sense of who is at fault, if it was the plane, the helicopter, air traffic control, and can you assure people that it is safe to fly in and out of D.C.?
Well, I've given you the analysis, and the analysis was it was based on vision. You had a lot of people that saw what was happening. You had some people that knew what was happening. There was some warnings, but the warnings were given very, very late. You know, those warnings were given very late. It was almost as they were given. A few seconds later, there was a crash. It should have been brought up earlier. But the people in the helicopter should have seen where they were going. I imagine people with 20/20 vision not seeing, you know, what's happening up there. Again, they shouldn't have been at the same height. You're going in reverse directions or sideways directions. Obviously, you want to be at different heights. I see it all the time when I'm flying. You have planes going in the opposite. They're always lower, we're higher, or they're... So if somehow there's a screw-up, there's not going to be a tragedy. It'll be close, but you know, there's never going to be a tragedy if you're at a different elevation. For whatever reason, they were at the same elevation. And also, from the American Airlines standard, he's along the track that every plane is along. You say, what was a helicopter doing in that track? It's very sad. But visually, somebody should have been able to see and taken that helicopter out of play, and they should have been at a different height.
Thank you, sir. You mentioned the Russians that were on board that plane. What other nationalities were on board that passenger?
There were a couple of others. We're going to be announcing it in about an hour. We have some very specific information. We're calling the countries. We've spoken to most of them, but there were some other countries represented.
Mr. President, have you spoken to President Putin?
I have not, no.
Mr. President, on your executive order,
Not about this.
On your executive order, you've already issued an executive order you say will restore aviation safety.
Right.
This crash happened after that. Was the executive order successful, and what more needs to change to keep people safe?
Well, you know, we issued it 3 days ago, and we're in the process of making those changes. This is something that should have been done a long time ago. Actually, my original order should have never been changed, and I think maybe you wouldn't have had this problem. Maybe. Yeah, please, go ahead.
Thank you. We see like everyday life that very often those diversity hires cause sometimes issues, as you just mentioned. So what plan do you have? Are we going to see some fire? Are you going to fire some of those diversity hire in the federal government? What plan do you have?
I would say the answer is yes. If we find that people aren't mentally competent, you see the language. The language is put out by them. And if you see that, I'm not going to bore you by reading it again, but these are not people that should be doing this particular job. They'd be very good for certain jobs, but not people that should be doing this particular job.
Mr. President, you have today blamed the diversity elements, but then told us that you weren't sure that the controllers made any mistake. You then said perhaps the helicopter pilots were the ones who made the mistake.
It's all under investigation.
I understand that. That's why I'm trying to figure out how you can come to the conclusion right now that diversity had something to do with this crash.
Because I have common sense, okay? And unfortunately, a lot of people don't. We want brilliant people doing this. This is a major chess game at the highest level. When you have 60 planes coming in during a short period of time, and they're all coming in different directions, and you're dealing with very high-level computer work and very complex computers. And one of the other things I will tell you is that the systems that were built, I was going to rebuild the entire system, and then we had an election that didn't turn out the way it should have. But they didn't build the systems properly. They spent a lot of money renovating a system, spending much more money than they would have spent if they bought a new system for air traffic controllers, meaning the computerized systems. There are certain companies that do a very good job. They didn't use those companies. They used companies that should not have been doing it. No, I think it's very important to understand that for some jobs, and not only this, but air traffic controllers, they have to be at the highest level of genius. Okay.
I want to ask you about the ice skaters in a moment because the U.S. ice skating community was affected. But first, if I can, the cited FAA text that you read is real. But the implication that this policy is new or that it stems from efforts that began under President Biden or the Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg is demonstrably false. It's been on the FAA's website. No, it's on the website, the FAA's website. It was there in 2013. It was there for the entirety.
What I read.
It was there for the entirety of your administration too. So my question is, why didn't you change the policy during your first administration?
I did change it. I changed the Obama policy, and we had a very good policy. And then Biden came in and he changed it. And then when I came in 3 days ago, I signed a new order bringing it to the highest level of intelligence. Okay.
It was on the website.
Please. Quiet.
Thank you, Mr.
Welcome
President.
back to the. I'm sorry.
You mentioned that a vision was probably the problem that was at issue in this crash. There's been some reports that one of the pilots in the helicopter may have been using night vision equipment. Was there any indication?
I heard that. We don't know. We're going to know that pretty soon. It may change your viewplane. You do have the night vision, so it's very possible that could have happened. That would be maybe a reason why you wouldn't actually see as well as on a clear night. You can see sometimes better without it. Have a couple of more.
Mr. President, is it helpful to have your Secretary of Transportation confirmed, and does this intensify your interest in getting other nominees confirmed quickly?
Go to what?
Is it helpful to have your Secretary of Transportation confirmed, and does this intensify your interest in getting other nominees confirmed quickly as well?
Well, sure. We want fast confirmations, and the Democrats, as you know, are doing everything they can to delay them. They've taken too long. We're struggling to get very good people that everybody knows are going to be confirmed, but we're struggling to get them out faster. We want them out faster. It's a good question, actually. We've been pushing Sean. Everyone knows Sean for a long time. He got many, many Democrat votes, but they want to take as long as they can. They ask questions like some of the questions that Peter would ask that were totally irrelevant and not very good questions, but they want to just keep it going. They want to keep it going as long as possible. I was very honored, actually, that you got so many Democrat votes. That was really good. That was really good.
When I apply to meet with the families, and second question, is it your impression that military training was done during that time?
The what?
The training that the helicopter was involved in. Is it anything you can tell us about
You
that?
don't know. These are the things that will come up with the investigation. You don't know, but the helicopter obviously was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and a tragedy occurred. Please.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've got a question about the.
No, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. You've been critical of the current regulations, and you've called for big reforms at FAA. I'm curious, sir.
I made the reforms, actually.
What is your message?
3 days ago, I made them.
Yes, sir. What is your message then to the American public in the weeks and months ahead? Should they feel hesitant to fly? And if you could clarify perhaps something that the Defense Secretary said when he said that this helicopter was on a continuity of government mission?
I don't know what that refers to, but they were practicing. They do that. They call it practicing, and they were, and that's something that should be done. It's only continuity in the sense that we want to have very good people, and that has to be in continuity, and that's what they refer to. But it was basically practice, and it was a practice that worked out very, very badly. Okay.
On his question, the first question, should people be hesitant to fly right now?
No, not at all. I've not hesitated to fly. This is something that it's been many years that something like this has happened, and the collision is just something that we don't expect ever to happen again. We are going to have the highest level people we've already hired. Some of the people that you've already hired for that position, long before we knew about this, I mean, long before, from the time I came in, we started going out and getting the best people because I said it's not appropriate what they're doing. I think it's a tremendous mistake. You know, they like to do things and they like to take them too far, and this is sometimes what ends up happening. Now, with that, I'm not blaming the controller. I'm saying there are things that you could question, like the height of the helicopter, the height of the plane being at the same level and going in opposite directions. It's not a positive. But no, we're already hiring people. No, flying is very safe. We have the safest flying anywhere in the world, and we'll keep it that way. Thank you all very much. Thank you very much, everybody.
Okay, that was Donald Trump speaking live from the White House this afternoon on the horrific events of the plane crashing overnight in Washington, D.C. He said some pretty, well, gobsmacking things. Many of you agreeing with him, by the way, saying, you know, Julie Murray, for example, I love Trump. And Paul saying, Trump is sorting out in half an hour what will take our politicians a couple of years. This is what American people voted for. If you are just joining us, you heard Donald Trump talking about that awful tragedy where we know 67 people now have lost their lives in the crash between an airplane and a helicopter. And Trump was saying that basically we need the right people in the Federal Aviation Authority. We don't need diversity. He says that too many appointments have been made to tick the diversity, equality and inclusion boxes. And he mentions we have had people turned down for jobs because they are white. We also heard from the Vice President, J.D. Vance, echoing the same thing. And also Sean Duffy, the new Secretary of Transportation, who's only been in the job for a week. As I said, very, very strong opinions there. So I think we can go now to Matthew Capucci, who is a Washington local and a journalist for the Washington newspaper, who witnessed the crash this morning and has just listened to what Donald Trump has had to say. Matthew, a huge amount of stuff to unpack there. First, let's start with the latest stuff first. What did you make what your president had to say today?
Well, I think this president historically has had a pattern of taking events and using them to make points that at some level are true, and then sort of making these jumps that just are not demonstrable, not commensurate with fact. For example, this is a tragedy. What's ongoing right now is a horrific situation. The National Transportation Safety Bureau is investigating. That's part of the process. The investigation has to unfold. Much of what he said emphasized the importance of having qualified people in positions like air traffic controlling. Great, that's a really good thing. However, to prematurely conjecture that incorrectly followed air traffic control procedures were a contributing factor here, 12 hours after this incident, without any commentary from the FAA or the NTSB or reviewing the air traffic control tapes, is so much of a conjecture, so much of a leap. It's the verbal equivalent of eating Play-Doh. And so to that end, it's disappointing to see how much political theater is wrapped up in this tragedy. This is the worst aircraft disaster in the United States since at least 2009 from a collision standpoint, and likely longer than that. 67 people are dead. there's a process that needs to unfold. The NTSB knows what they're doing, the FAA knows what they're doing, and that process needs to take time. And so leaping to conclusions for the promotion of good sound bites or social media, as was likely what he was doing, is inappropriate and unconscionable.
How do you think his comments will go down with, certainly with the people of Washington, which is your patch? Do you think, I mean, obviously this happened there. I mean, you witnessed it yourself this morning, a horrific thing to witness. How do you think our Donald Trump's comments will go down with the people in Washington?
I think with episodes like this, events like this, you know, the first thing that needs to happen is empathy and reassurance. The second thing that needs to happen is a thorough investigation to make sure this doesn't happen again. Skipping steps and jumping to conclusions not only sort of undermines the validity of what's determined later on through actual investigations, but it's pernicious. It takes the victims and their families on this emotional roller coaster of what was the cause, what's the right answer, who's to blame, and it's just sort of needlessly complicated a process that needs to be, by definition, procedural. And I think the people in Washington went through this back in the 1980s with an aircraft that had improper de-icing, used reverse thrusters, ingested snow into the engines. The pilots at that time had largely flown only in warm environments. And unfortunately, there was a crash with the 14th Street Bridge, and dozens of people died back in the 1980s. This sort of reawakens scars of that. This city has sort of seen something like this before. And to sort of rip off that Band-Aid, to sort of reignite this wound, but then to make it such a political circus in a press conference, I think the people in the city will be largely disappointed. And mind you, I'm not a political person. I didn't vote in the last election. I don't do politics. I do science. My degree is in atmospheric sciences, and you have to approach things like this in a very scientific, objective way, without emotions, without feelings. And what was done in this press conference was embarrassing.
Matthew, I just want to read a comment from one of our viewers here in the UK. This is from Sharon. If that crash had happened in England, Labour press statement would be, our government's press statement would be, we are very sad about the deaths. Our hearts are with the family of the victims. We're going to have an inquiry and we'll get back to you in 10 years' time. Many of our viewers are quite liking the fact that Donald Trump does cut through, to use his phrase, which I'm not going to because it's an offensive word and I'd like to apologise for that word as well, but cut through all the red tape and the sort of like the politicising that goes with it and treading a very fine line. Yes, some of the stuff he said was quite shocking, certainly blaming Obama and Biden for the diversity and equality and inclusion hires. But many, many people certainly here are saying they respect him for being so straight-talking.
Well, I think that's the thing, and there's a reason he got elected. People in the United States are sort of sick of processes that don't always award positions to the most qualified person. Understandably so, that can be frustrating. However, in this case, it seems like what was perceived to be him cutting through the BS was really him talking in sort of a way that made him accessible, but didn't necessarily convey information that was solid. Much of what he mentioned was very basic level. He basically did impressions of which way the planes or the aircraft were going. And people in times of need look for conversational, accessible tones. And he delivers that. That's why people like his messaging. However, if what he's saying is wrong or conjecture, that's a problem. And you're exactly right. A 10-year-long inquiry, a years-long inquiry doesn't satisfy the public. Answers need to come sooner rather than later, and adjustments need to be made. They need to speed up this investigation. So much bureaucracy exists in the government that investigations oftentimes do take too long. Wholeheartedly agree. Everybody in the United States, everybody in the world agrees that government stuff takes too long. But you can't expect to have all the answers 12 hours through and twist them to make political points, and that's the problem here.
And do you think, I mean, how is the media going to react to what Trump has said this afternoon? I mean, how do you think your newspapers and your TV stations are going to cover those comments?
The media in the United States, and it would appear, just one moment, there's so much, speaking of which, the media is actually calling right now, asking for another inquiry. But what I will say right now, goodness gracious, what I will say right now is that in the United States, the media needs to focus more on fact-checking the words of the president rather than trying to put out the first headline. So often in the United States, people try to be first rather than best or most accurate, and that's one of the big issues with this case. So I think we're likely going to see a number of headlines that come out in the next hour or so quoting the president's words without going in, doing the fact-checking, seeing what the issues were, waiting for NTSB reports, figuring out if diversity was an issue here, which it likely wasn't, or if air traffic control procedures were followed correctly, were the flight path standard, was something tweaked. That's going to be something the media should be doing, and I don't know if they will be doing that.
Matthew, finally, just quickly, I mean, obviously, the main thrust of Donald Trump was about the Federal Aviation Authority and the diversity, equality and inclusion hiring thing. I mean, does that actually... I think we've lost the connection there. Matthew Capucci, thank you very much, Washington journalist, on what you heard Donald Trump say in that press conference. Joining us now is GB News US correspondent from Washington, D.C., Steve Edgington. Steve, yes, well, I mean, that was a pretty eye-opening press conference, I think is one way of describing it. I mean, Donald Trump being Donald Trump was very cutting through the BS, as he would put it, and saying it like he sees it. What did you make of what you've heard?
I thought it was a pretty explosive press conference, actually. You know, pardon the language, but I mean, he was very, very forthcoming in criticising diversity and DEI in the Biden and Obama administrations, particularly on the hiring front when it comes to air traffic controllers. And he was quoting from the FAA and from various news articles about hiring people with severe mental issues, and also people criticizing the fact that the FAA is too white and trying to promote ethnic minorities and so on. And his point was that we need the best people in these positions. He also put a lot of blame onto the pilots of the helicopter, the military helicopter. He said that the route that the commercial aircraft was taking was a typical route that all of these airplanes, fly on when they're coming into Ronald Reagan National Airport in Washington, D.C. This is the route they've been using for 20 years, he said. So it is incredibly strange that this helicopter was at the same altitude and flying in the same direction as this commercial aircraft. And Donald Trump, no doubt about it, he has politicized this crash very quickly. He's already, he laid blame in that press conference on the previous Secretary for Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, and, he also blamed those DEI diversity initiatives in the FAA. He didn't quite say that they are the reason the crash happened. I don't think he went that far. Some of the journalists were asking him to clarify his statements on that. He was just making a general point that diversity and DEI have been a significant issue in the federal, in the FAA, and particularly with hiring air traffic controllers. So his point was, I've decided to reverse those DEI decisions and to hire, we need the best people possible, particularly in positions where people's lives are at risk. And if you work in, air traffic control, it's your job to keep people safe and to keep people from being killed in horrific crashes like this. Again, we don't know whether the FAA or air traffic controllers were to blame for this, and it's probably too early to speculate on that. But Donald Trump certainly was making those very, very forthright points, attacking the Democrats, attacking his predecessors. And I think a lot of Americans would probably agree with him that we need the best people in those positions, not based on their race, and certainly not hiring people with severe psychiatric problems for diversity reasons.
I think many of our viewers and listeners are quite shocked that that is indeed, if that's what the Federal Aviation Authority hiring requirement says. I mean, I think that's quite a shocking thing. But he did actually, when he was asked in that press conference if he blamed the Democrats, and he mentioned Obama and Biden several times, before any investigation has taken place, he goes, no, that's not a smart question, and instantly shut that question down.
Yeah, I think he wants to give people answers very, very quickly. And as you said earlier, you know, this isn't. People will be waiting years to know the result of investigations usually in these circumstances. And I think Donald Trump wanted to give people an idea about, you know, what the opinions were of experts just after the crash. He wanted to give people an idea of perhaps what went wrong. And he was making the point that helicopters have an incredible ability to maneuver. So they should have been able to, you know, they can go in all sorts of directions. They can go up and down. It's quite an easy and simple thing to do, you know, to avoid these kind of crashes. And, you know, he was wondering exactly how this pilot wasn't able to see this huge commercial aircraft as it came into land. And he was also asking, one of the journalists asked an incredibly interesting question about whether the helicopter pilot was wearing night vision goggles. And Donald Trump didn't deny that he was. He said that we will find out very soon whether that's the case. But perhaps that's the reason that this pilot of the helicopter was unable to see, or it was unclear to him, you know, that there was this airplane landing straight in front of him, straight in front of his eyes. So I think Donald Trump, you know, he is trying to expose what went wrong very quickly. He wants to give people clarity very quickly. I think that's understandable from the family's perspectives, but also he will face criticism, as we heard from the previous guest, that he is rushing to speculation before we actually know exactly what went wrong here. And he's certainly politicizing it very quickly. You know, or the Democrats will be very, very upset about his comments. I'm sure the media here in the United States, I assume, are going to, you know, be very, very angry or very upset with his press conference, blaming DEI, blaming diversity, these kind of initiatives that, of course, many in the liberal media here in the United States support. So Donald Trump, you know, I think his press conference will make waves across the United States and particularly here in Washington, D.C.
Just finally, before we leave you, just had a message in from Gillian, one of our viewers who's an RAF veteran, and she says, this is not the time for political showboating, Mr. Trump. I'm sure she will be echoing many of the, certainly, maybe, you know, the victims' families.
I think so. I think, you know, Donald Trump did stress this is a time of mourning. He said that, you know, all of the United States, 340 million people will come together and mourn this terrible tragedy. He talked about, you know, giving prayers to the people who died, and he's, you know, also praising those people or talking about those people in Russia who'd been killed, the Russians on that plane. So there was a little bit of consideration and talking about you know, his thoughts and prayers and so on, but also it's very controversial to politicize these kind of things so quickly after the crash. But at the same time, he wants answers, and I think, you know, some people will understand why he's making those criticisms, particularly if they did lead to any kind of crisis or the disaster last night.
Indeed. Thank you very much for bringing us up to date on that. Steve Edgington, our correspondent in Washington, D.C. Joining me now is US political analyst Eric Ham. Eric, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Good to talk to you. A fairly explosive press conference, to borrow the phrase that Steve has just used. What did you make of what you heard Donald Trump say?
Well, it was very shocking. He started the press conference out with a moment of silence for the victims. And of course, the immediate thought and reaction normally would have been, okay, this is going to be about the victims and about their families. But to make it political, but not only political, but to blame it on a certain subset or section of the population was just very striking and I think very jarring. And considering that people are still seeking answers and also seeking comfort at a time like this, I thought it was just very explosive, even though it's something that you typically might expect from even Donald Trump. It still, I think, was deeply, deeply jarring.
I was going to say, Eric, many of our viewers are saying this is what we like about Donald Trump. He cuts through all the, you know, the red tape and the BS, to use his phrase, and gets straight to the point. In the UK, we'd have an inquiry about an inquiry and we'll get back to you in 10 years' time. So many people are liking that. So are you surprised? I mean, this is what Donald Trump does. Are you surprised that he was so outspoken, certainly about the diversity, equality and inclusion hiring?
Well, the problem with that is he went to an area where you have soldiers that are dead, you have innocent civilians that are dead, and and now the question becomes, how do you take this round peg and put it into this square peg and put it into this round hole? And how does DEI actually play into this? I mean, I think there are a number of questions that a lot of people have about what happened, how did it happen, and more importantly, going forward, how do we ensure that something like this does not happen again? And I think those are the questions that people would want the commander-in-chief, the president of the United States, to get the answers to. But to basically say, well, this is to the blame of DEI, when we don't know what even that means and how does that even apply to this situation here, it just seems as though the president is trying to take the blame off of him, which no one is blaming him, of course, but he is now over air traffic control. And so this does fall in his lap. But again, take the lead and take the accountability to get to the bottom and get to the answer, not simply just find scapegoats. And I think that's what the president did with those comments.
Eric, finally, just one final thing before you go. Have we heard any response from the other side? I mean, he sort of like named and shamed Barack Obama and Joe Biden for being responsible for the DEI, our sort of like obsession that we have.
That has nothing to do with what happened today. In fact, we've already heard from former President Barack Obama expressing his deep sorrow for those who lost their lives in this tragedy today.
OK, thank you very much. That's US political analyst Eric Ham. Thank you very much for joining us, Eric. Golly gosh. OK, well, let me know what you think of all of you have heard this afternoon. gbnews.com/your say. I will read as many out as possibly can. So we will come back to that as soon as we have any more information for you. But moving on now, Labour have brought in new laws to, yeah, you got it, smash the gangs. So let's get the latest with GB News political editor Christopher Hope. Mr. Hope, thank you very much. It's a huge story, this one, isn't it? But you've got another huge story as well for us.
On a normal day, a really, really big story. But of course, Donald Trump's press conference there.
What did you make, just quickly, what did you make of it, what you heard?
I didn't follow the full detail because I was busy writing up all my other things for our website, which you can read now. But I think he is someone who, he had a moment of pause at the beginning and he made other political remarks. Maybe now isn't the day for that, some would say. Maybe later on when we learn lessons of what happened. But
were you surprised?
No, I think, as our viewers are saying and listeners, they are saying that he is someone who says what he feels and doesn't go by the normal rules.
OK, right, OK. Now, you've come in to talk about something completely different. I was just curious, because you're an expert on these things. What are you talking about?
We've interviewed Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, about her plans to cut illegal migration, because the government announced its plans today. What has gone is the Tory Rwanda plan, replaced with new counter-terror, new terrorism-style laws to try and deal with this problem at the heart. The government is saying that won't work, the idea of a deterrent won't work. Instead, we're going all in for tackling this issue with law enforcement. We'll see if it works. But here's what Yvette Cooper had to say to GB News just last night. Home Secretary, last year 36,000 migrants arrived here. How many will your border security, asylum and immigration bill stop?
Well, the plan for change the Prime Minister set out before Christmas is clear about that it needs to reduce illegal migration, and that means tackling and preventing these dangerous boat crossings. So this new law will bring in counter-terror-style powers to go after the criminal gangs because they are undermining our border security, they're putting lives at risk, and frankly, they have been getting away with it for far too long.
Priti Patel, former Home Secretary, said she would halve migrant crossings back in October 2019. That didn't work. Why won't you, though, try and make a bold commitment to make this happen?
Well, you're right that what she said not only didn't work, frankly, the opposite happened. And I think we then had a 20-fold increase in the number of these boat crossings after that. And I think we can't just keep doing any more of the gimmicks. It's got to be this really serious law enforcement. And we've got to treat the border security in the same way that we treat issues of security against terror threats. And that's why we're introducing counter us terror-style powers, to give law enforcement much stronger powers to act early in the way that they could around terrorism cases, because that's a sign of really the seriousness of this. If we are going to strengthen border security and prevent lives being lost, we have to have stronger law enforcement powers to go after the dangerous gangs.
When can GB News viewers and listeners see the results? When will this bill be in play, and when they can see the results on the ground?
Well, we'll bring this law through Parliament as rapidly as possible. That means over the coming months to bring it in this year. Yes. So we'll bring this in this year. It goes alongside, though. We've set up the Border Security Command since the election, and we've also increased returns. So 16,500 returns since the elections, a 20% increase in what we had before, because we believe that the rules need to be respected and enforced, alongside needing to do work with other countries, the new agreements that we've got with Germany, with Iraq, and particularly that's important because some of the gangs operating across Europe are Iraqi Kurdish gangs, and that's why we've been working with the Iraqi government there.
Do you worry you're missing a deterrent? I mean, Rwanda, you junked it on day one of your government, but it was an idea to deport people to Rwanda. Anecdotally, reporters said it was working when they interviewed migrants waiting in northern France. Some went to Ireland, as you know. Donald Trump has said tonight he wants to open a deportation centre in Guantanamo Bay. Why don't do something dramatic like that to show these migrants you mean business?
So the thing about that Rwanda scheme is they had that in place for 2.5 years, and they sent 4 volunteers, and it cost the taxpayer £700 million. So that just wasn't working in the slightest. It was a gimmick. And that's why what we've done is put the investment, put the staff into tackling returns. So it's why we've increased returns, and that's a very substantial increase in returns since the election, because it is right that the rules should be enforced. We'll do that in a serious, steady way. That's what we've been doing, and that's why we're also bringing in the new powers going forward as well.
You're taking phones off them. You're taking when you find them, but you're giving them clothes, shoes, and phones when they arrive here. An FOI today says that £4 million spent over 3 years on kit when they arrive, according to the Telegraph. Why are you doing that? These are rewards for getting across the channel.
So we need to make sure we're dealing with the gangs that are organising this, the dangerous things that are happening in terms of the boats, and also make sure that we're saving lives as well, because you've seen children crushed, we've seen terrible things happening. But one of the measures that we're bringing in is a new strengthening the law so that if you are on a crowded boat, if you are putting other people's lives at risk on those boats, we can take action. That will be a new offence as well. So putting other people's lives at risk at sea, we should also be able to take stronger action. And then when people arrive, to be able to download their phones so that we can trace the smuggler gangs who we know they will have had contact with, who have been organising these boats in the first place. So those are among the powers that we're introducing so that we can take much stronger action.
Legal migration, will you agree to cut legal migration even if it damages the economy? That's a big issue for your department. You're judged by it by our viewers and listeners. What's your take on that?
Net migration needs to come down. It quadrupled in the space of just about 4 years. It needs to come down, and we've seen this ridiculous situation where we had the big increase in visas for work at the same time as training for UK residents was being cut, and where we had more people, UK residents, not working at all. We've got to flip that round, and frankly, if you invest in training in the UK, that is good for the UK economy and also means we bring net migration down.
Very good. Thank you, Home Secretary. Thank you. That's Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, talking to GB News. The first sit-down interview we've done with her for a long time.
Yes.
So great to have her on, talking about the issues that matter to our viewers and listeners, and particularly to her department. Now, in summary, she's saying Rwanda plan is a gimmick. It's now gone. It's consigned to history. It's all now on law and order, terror tower powers, taking away mobile phones, dealing with these at the source, dealing with colleagues on the continent for the Home Office. If it works, we'll wait and see. Results this year will hold her to account.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Christopher Hope, for that. As I said, interview with Yvette Cooper. Still to come, I'll be talking to the rock and roll king, as is described, funeral director Howard Hodgson, and his opinions on the latest in politics. I'm Dawn Neeson. This is GB News, Britain's news channel. We'll see you very soon.
I'm Bev Turner. Thank you for joining us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
We were talking earlier about the issue of Siri listening to you. Well, it's not just your own conversations being sort of harvested for data, but it's a problem with AI. So what seems to have happened yesterday is that Apple issued a alert saying that Luke Littler had won the darts before he had. I mean, imagine what would, if he then gone on to lose, how that would have looked. I mean, obviously, because he went on to win, at least they got the story right, but before it had happened. So what it seems to happen is that the AI farms existing stories, and what it has done, that's the alert. We can see the alert there now, and it also claiming that Brazilian tennis player Rafael Nadal had come out as gay, when actually a different Brazilian tennis player was actually mentioned in the original story. So what it does is you see that it's branded as BBC Sport. What the Apple AI system does is it farms alerts that it thinks people are getting from the source, and then summarises them into one alert.
Looks to me like you would assume, OK, the BBC are reporting this.
Absolutely.
So the BBC News might be saying something else.
So it could happen to any news organisation.
This has highlighted a massive issue. I mean, having editorial judgment and quality control, because if this is going on, it's just contributing to the flow of misinformation.
Yes.
And we know that this is a problem on social media, people reporting false things. But if it seems to come from trusted news sources, that is a massive issue in credibility. I mean, if you had something like Reuters, who's a big news provider, doing this, you could hold people accountable, you could make changes, but when it's the AI doing it, I mean, what do? You're going to have to reprogram it in some way.
And if you just lost control, if you're a news source, you've lost control of what goes out, because it basically farms it, puts your logo on it, and sends it out, even when it's nonsense.
GB News, the People's Channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
I'm Andrew Pearce. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm Dawn Neeson, standing in for Martin Daubney on GB News this afternoon. Now, we've got a bit of a treat for you. I'm going to read this description out, right, OK, because Howard has just had a heart attack over it. Rock star looks and lifestyle to match. Yes, I'm talking about, now, it might sound a bit strange, funeral director Howard Hodson made millions through innovation, acquisition and, death. Funeral director. Howard has been affectionately named Dr. Death, and I'm thrilled to say he joins me now. Howard, you did look faintly surprised when I described you as having rock star looks and a lifestyle to match. I mean, literally sexing up the funeral business.
Well, there was, in the 80s when most of this happened, I think that people were very much more, I didn't really want the ulcerated alcoholic nose. There's been a fair few in the general image, and I was only in my 30s. And I suppose, actually, I'd grown up wanting to be a Beatle rather than the funeral director, so I actually sort of quite liked all the acclaim of rock star look. I was a bit annoyed reading the clips now, all those years ago, and thinking, always described as the third division football. I thought, well, why can't I be a first division footballer?
Indeed.
Why ageing rock star? Why, Paul McCartney, aged 82, is
Still
a very
doing
good
it.
rock star. Why should I be actually an ageing rock star aged about 35? But that's what it was portrayed. And in a way, I suppose I should have said, hey, stop this. I am the only genuine funeral director. Everybody else is just owning funeral businesses, but I was a funeral director.
This is what I wanted to talk to you, Howard. I mean, you've got a book out. This is the first part of an autobiography telling your amazing, a rags to riches story, I think we could describe it as. So I want to talk a bit about what you make of what you have achieved in your life as an entrepreneur and being incredibly successful, and where the country is now. Do you think you could have achieved what you've achieved in your amazing career, given the way the government is at the moment? And we're told, that's the cover of your book there, we're told it's all about growth. You actually achieved growth under your own steam. Do you think you could do what you've done in the past today?
No, I wouldn't have been able to. And there are two answers to that question. I mean, today people become billionaires overnight on something to do with social media.
Yeah, well, there's that, yeah.
But in terms of those days, you had to graft and you had to start a business and run it and borrow from the bank and put your wife, your kids, your house, your shirt on it all, pay it back, do it again, etc. And I was very lucky because initially 75 wasn't a particularly easy time. It was the winter of discontent.
We didn't have it easy then. I mean, no, absolutely.
But then after that, the Blessed Margaret became Prime Minister, and she said, no more lame ducks. We are going, there's no such thing as government money. It's your money, and we spend it. And the fact is that I'm not going to support lame ducks. I'm going to give people grants. And of course, in that great age of prosperity where she sold everybody their council house at a very cheap price, she was able to denationalise industries without much complaint from anybody and sell the shares to people. And she gave everybody middle-class aspiration, which is why Tony Blair, or perhaps known as Tory Blair, moved the whole of the Labour Party so far to the right to get re-elected because she'd made people Tory voters. It was a period where there was certainly entrepreneurship was like replaced football as the bedfellows of rock stars. Everybody was to be an entrepreneur. And, you know, actually, by the way, entrepreneurs aren't usually academics. They're usually... I was really dim at school. And,
I'm sure that's not true.
It is true, I promise you. You should read my reports. And my father used to have a fit when he read them. The fact is that if you have drive and determination, and if you have a dream, and like the Rodgers and Hammerstein, my South Pacific, you know, you have to have a dream. If you have a dream and you have drive and determination, you will make it. And would it be as easy today? No, it wouldn't be, because there is so much in your way.
So do you think that this growth we're hearing of doesn't leave you very optimistic for the future?
No, I live in Monaco. You know, so, and I wouldn't... the fact of the matter is I've paid a lot of tax when I sold Hodson Holdings, and when I came to sell Memoria, I wasn't going to pay that tax because I might as well have just opened the loo and poured the money down. Why, you know, why give it to a government that's just going to waste it? I'd rather it go to my children.
Interesting. Thank you very much, Howard. We've run out of time, unfortunately. Give us the title of your book again. It's called...
This Life in Death.
Brilliant. And it's on available now to buy?
You can buy it on Amazon and all good bookshops.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. That's Howard Hodson there, 74 years old. I hope you don't mind me saying that.
No,
look remarkably good on it.
75. I'm still younger than Mecca.
Rockstar looks, and a great book. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much. OK, now, there's still lots more still to come between now and 6 o'clock, including former Home Secretary Suella Braverman warning that 20 years from now, Britain could be run by Islamists. Don't go too far. But first, let's get those news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Dawn, thank you very much. The top stories. US President Donald Trump has paid tribute to those who've lost their lives in the Washington, D.C. air collision. Authorities in Washington say they don't expect to find any survivors after a plane and a helicopter collided in midair over the Potomac River. These are the latest live shots from the US Capitol. More than 300 emergency responders are searching for survivors. 64 people, including crew, were on the American Airlines Flight. 3 soldiers were on board the Black Hawk helicopter. At least 28 bodies have already been recovered. This was the plane coming in to land at Reagan Washington National Airport seconds before the collision. The helicopter was on a training flight when the crash happened just before 9 p.m. local time. It's the first major US commercial air crash since 2009. President Trump says the tragedy has really shaken a lot of people, including those from other countries whose citizens were on board the plane.
Our hearts are shattered alongside yours, and our prayers are with you now. And in the days to come, we'll be working very, very diligently in the days to come. We're here for you to wipe away the tears and to offer you our devotion, our love, and our support. There's great support. In moments like this, the differences between Americans fade to nothing compared to the bonds of affection and loyalty that unite us all, both as Americans and even as nations. We are one family, and today we are all heartbroken. We're all searching for answers.
In other news, 3 Israeli hostages and 5 Thai nationals held in Gaza have been released by the terror group Hamas, and they're now back in Israel. 20-year-old Agam Berger, a female soldier, was handed over to the Red Cross in Jabalia in northern Gaza earlier today before being transferred to the Israeli military at the border. The Israeli military confirmed a further 7 hostages have been handed over to the Red Cross, including Savili and Gadi Moses and Arbel Yehud, along with 5 unnamed Thai nationals. Their release is not part of the official ceasefire deal. And the communications regulator has proposed cutting letter deliveries with second-class post arriving every second day and no longer on Saturdays. Ofcom said Royal Mail customers' postal needs would be met by keeping first-class deliveries 6 days a week. It also outlined provisional plans to reduce goals for the delivery company, bringing down the percentage of first-class post delivered the next day from 93% to 90%, and second-class mail delivered within 3 days from 98.5% to 95%. Royal Mail has been hit by hefty fines by Ofcom for poor performance, more than £16 million in the latest 18 months alone. And those are the latest headlines. For now, more from me in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Crash Law 24 sponsors the GB News Finance Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2439 and €1.1948. The price of gold is £2,242.89 per ounce. And the FTSE 100 has reached a new record high, smashing through the 8,600 mark for the first time. It closed on 8,646 points.
Crash Law 24 sponsors the GB News Finance Report.
Hello again and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. It's a fine day for most of us with blue skies and any showers tending to ease during the rest of the day before further spells of wet weather arrive overnight as an occluded front moves in from the Atlantic. Now ahead of that we do have a ridge of high pressure. The Northern Isles seeing low pressure nearby and a continuation of some showers, but elsewhere across Scotland, an early frost and some low temperatures below freezing. Likewise for northern and eastern England ahead of the rain that's moving in. Now, because of that, we'll see some hill snow for a time overnight, but most of the lying snow above about 500 metres. And it's a grey, wet and cold start to the day for many of us on Friday. Northern Ireland seeing the best of any brightness first thing. Otherwise, there'll be a lot of low cloud, outbreaks of rain, some heavy downpours for a time along the south and southeast of England, and some drizzle as well as mist and fog here and there. But Northern Ireland, Western Scotland as well, Western England and Wales starting to brighten up through the morning. Sign of things to come during the rest of the day across western parts of the country. I think for central Scotland into northern and central England as well as the east of England, we'll keep the low cloud through much of the morning, outbreaks of rain and drizzle. The heavier rain tending to ease away towards the southeast, turning drier, and in the west certainly turning brighter by the afternoon with some decent sunny spells coming through. So a pleasant afternoon for western areas, 8 to 10 Celsius with sunny spells. Not feeling quite so pleasant where we keep the low cloud across parts of the Midlands, eastern and northern England, as well as central Scotland. That does tend to fizzle away into Friday night, albeit slowly. Further west, we've got clear spells for a time, so a touch of frost, but further cloud and rain comes along at times through the weekend and into the start of next week.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. Problems in Greater Manchester on the M60 do continue. The anti-clockwise entry slip road remains closed to junction 11 at Barton where a car's broken down. And in Derbyshire, the A610 is closed eastbound just north of Ripley where lorries overturned and left a large shed load of stones all over the road just off the Hartsay roundabout at the A38. In Hertfordshire at Hemel Hempstead, the A414 Breakspear Way, that's blocked off by an accident and there are long queues on the Essex stretch of the M25 anti-clockwise just before junction 31 at Lakeside. Emergency repairs continue following an oil spillage. Long queues back through the Dartford tunnels into Kent. And on the M4 eastbound heading out of Wales into England, the Exeter Slip Road is closed at the M49 for emergency repairs following a spillage. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Welcome back. Blimey, what an afternoon. I am Dawn Daubney. Thank you very much for that, people writing the auto cue in front of me. I am actually Dawn Neeson. I haven't suddenly married Martin Daubney, although it's got a ring to it. And Mrs Daubney, I think, would send me her thoughts and prayers on that one. But I am Dawn Neeson, and this is GB News. Now, former Home Secretary Suella Braverman has warned that the UK could become an Islamist nation with nuclear weapons within the next 20 years. Now, we had this story, we were discussing this story, and lots and lots and lots of you, in fact, nearly all of you, agree with Suella Braverman. So, what do we make of it now? Has multiculturalism failed? Do you agree with Suella? Most of you did earlier on. So let's see what's happening, how you're all feeling now. Joining us now is former spokesperson for Reform UK, Gwentala, and Jacob Williams, the head of domestic policy for Pictou House. Thank you very much for joining me, gentlemen. So, Suella Braverman, she has suggested that the UK could become the first Islamist nation with nuclear weapons. She said this in America, said Britain could fall into the hands of Muslim fundamentalism and become like Iran. She made these comments at a speech to the far-right Heritage Foundation think tank in Washington, echoing what Vice President J.D. Vance had said previously. Now, as I said, lots of love in the room for Suella's comments so far. What do you make of what she's got to say?
And as you said, she was following the comments of Vance before before the inauguration. I think there's a level of tongue-in-cheek and of hyperbole in what she has to say. But what you don't have, what I don't have, what the viewers out there in England and Britain don't have, is the access that she had to, as Home Secretary, to documents and reports and briefings from the security services that I don't have. So she is a King's Counsel. She's a senior lawyer. She has been Home Secretary. And whilst one can dismiss it as hyperbole, I think one should take a little bit more caution in doing so. I think to describe the Heritage Foundation as far right is also pushing it a bit. They're a right-wing think tank in America. They're a huge operation over there, but I think far right is overstating it. And that would say that anybody who voted for Trump is far right, and I think that's again overstating, in which case 50% of the American population are. I don't think that doesn't work. But she does highlight some serious, and she's talking about some serious issues. The birth rate, who is being born in this country, the fact that our population is going up, as we've seen recently with the ONS study. The population is going up, and it's not going up from what one might call the native British. It's coming up from immigration.
1 in 3 babies in this country are born to non-British mothers,
including 2 of my own children. And so this is This is a fact. This is happening. Now, whether that translates into an Islamist takeover and an Islamist country with a nuclear bomb, I thought, well, Pakistan has nuclear weapons, and I think they're probably more likely to be the first Islamist nation with a nuclear bomb than ourselves. However, there are serious concerns, and maybe sometimes you use hyperbole in order to highlight concerns.
OK. I mean, Jacob, I mean, do you think Gwen's got a point here? I mean, Suella has been Home Secretary. So she has seen stuff that none of us have had sort of like, party to know about. So do you think maybe, all right, maybe she may be exaggerating here and she's getting the headlines, which she is, but do you think maybe there might be some truth in it?
I don't think there's any truth at all in this claim. I think it's at best a fantasy. The notion that there's going to be some kind of plot to take over Britain, turn it into Iran in the next 20 years, if she had access to some secret information that no one else had, it begs the question why nobody else in government or the civil service had this information. Now, no one is going to deny there are some attitudes that are concerning among Britain's Muslim population. We wrote a report on this earlier this week, and the reality is that there are concerning attitudes among many communities. Nearly half of young people under the age of 24 will say when asked that they think we should have a dictatorship in this country.
Yes, I saw that story, yes.
Yeah, there are all kinds of crazy attitudes. 20% of the public think it would be good if we had colonies still. Well, they're not trying to bring it back or invade former colonies. So, yes, there are problems, but there isn't any Islamist plot. The notion's a fantasy, and I think she's talking absolute nonsense.
OK. Gwen, I mean, why is she saying it? Is she saying it to bring herself closer to Trump and to Vance?
Not particularly. I think there's a certain amount of remaining relevant. But I'm not as sanguine as Jacob here. I think that any reading of history over the last 1,500 years to suggest that there isn't a threat from radical Islam to any nation in which radical Islamists live is, I think, very, very short-sighted.
Well, even Prevent admit that, as useless
when
as
they're
they
not
are,
telling us that we're all far
exactly.
right, yeah, and
but even Prevent admit that most of their cases contain sort of like, Islamist threat rather than the far-right threat.
Well, yes, of course, because Islam is a proselytising religion. It believes. And, OK, many religions do, but we're all very Church of England in this country, and we're rather a cup of tea and biscuits after Mass. But it believes that the world should be Islamic. It believes that if, broadly, Muslims believe that if one is introduced to Islam and rejects it, then you are in some ways bad. And that is just a reality. And to pretend it isn't is to not to have read any history of the last.
I think the reality is that people in
very quickly, unfortunately.
People in Britain are rather mature enough to actually deal with religious disagreements, to disagree deeply about fundamental questions, and still get on, including the vast majority of British Muslims, who are even more likely than the general public to identify with Britain and to oppose political violence too.
And we have, many people getting in touch about Sharia law and ghettos in this country where there is no integration. Do you think people should be encouraged to integrate more?
Absolutely. 90% of British Muslims agree with me and want to integrate. The problem,
90%?
Absolutely right. It's what we found in the report we wrote last week. Mm-hmm. The issue is, yes, there are some problems with these Sharia councils, which, by the way, are not courts. They have no legal standing. And we do have to make sure everyone's aware of their legal rights. But we don't have a Islamist plot. We're not about to become Iran in 20 years. The notion is a delusional fantasy.
OK, and there, gentlemen, we have to leave it, unfortunately. Gwen Taylor, thank you very much, and Jacob Williams, thank you very much for coming in and discussing Suella Braverman. Let me know what you think. gbnews.com/your say. Now, Donald Trump says he will deport pro-Palestinian activists. I'm Dawn Neeson. This is GB News, Britain's news channel. You don't want to miss this one. Don't go too far. We'll see you soon.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, isn't it?
No,
because the failure is
you're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff.
Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood.
So join me on Jubes & Co. weeknights at 6 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
TikTok chefs, Instagram chefs, that they put children off or young people off of cooking because it's so expertly done they can't do it. No, my young lad, he's 17, he is amazing in the kitchen. Is he? Oh, he is. He's amazing in the kitchen. And he gets it all off TikTok. He comes down, he can put burgers, wraps, stews, curries, sauces, and the smells in the kitchen. I said, where'd you get these? Oh, just TikTok, I'm trying it out. And it's just amazing the things that he can conjure up. So for some people, it might be... it's an inspiration for him. So they're saying that it's intimidation. For my boy, it's an inspiration. They say it's entertainment. For my boy, it's an infomercial. I watch him doing his stuff. At that stage, I could do baked beans on toast and knock up a salad. That was it. But my boy can do all sorts of stuff.
It makes it accessible as well, doesn't it? Because lots of people say, like, you need an education to be in the kitchen, or you need to go find yourself loads of cookbooks. But you don't.
No.
You go on your phone now.
I mean, like, all the spices, sesame oil. I mean, I'm amazed at the stuff that he does. So it's encouraging. All you just need is a kitchen well-stocked and have a go. And understand that failure is actually the route to learning. I mean, he's made mistakes, he's stuck stuff in the bin, but that young man, I am amazed at some of the stuff he does.
I don't mind cooking at all. It's cleaning up that I have the problem with. Dawn, let's talk about sex.
Can I just say there are things called restaurants, by the way? Just put that one. My hell, I don't even know where the kitchen is.
OK.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Dawn Daubney. I'm Dawn Neeson in for Martin Daubney, but this is definitely GB News. Right now, US President Donald Trump has pledged to cancel student visas of all pro-Palestinian activists, or as he calls them, Hamas sympathisers. So let's go now to speak with political advisor Pablo Ohana to find out what's going on with this story. Pablo, thank you very much for joining us today. Now, this is based on basically saying if you are a student at a university in America, a foreign student, and you sort of like, you support Hamas, in Donald Trump's words, we're going to throw you out of the country. What do you make of this one?
Yeah, it's incredibly concerning. And I'm a bit surprised, actually, because targeting individuals for political speech, particularly students engaged in protests, violates the First Amendment, which, they're so protective of. Deporting activists who join peaceful protests, I mean, it risks sort of setting a race to the bottom and suppressing any type of dissent. And where does that end? How much longer until we're not allowed to fairly criticize Donald Trump and his administration? I think we have to be really careful, incredibly careful about what pro-Palestinian means. Because if that means that you are anti-war on Gaza, then that is a sweeping statement against almost all young people, the vast majority of whom are against the war in Gaza. So are you pro-Palestinian if you want a two-state solution? Are you pro-Palestinian if you support Hamas? If you think Israel has gone too far? This is just, it is problematically broad. And I think it is a real concern if you cannot differentiate between being pro-Palestinian, being anti-Semitic, anti-state of Israel. All these things are fundamentally different.
Of course. Pablo, the clip that I saw was three students who were kissing some graffiti that said, "I heart Hamas." So there was no doubt about what they were doing. And it just reminded me of in this country when we had those girls at that political march wearing jackets with the paragliders on them, which was incredibly offensive.
Yeah, I mean, and that is exactly my point, is you have to be really being anti the state of Israel and the actions that they have taken is very different to being pro-Hamas. Being pro-Hamas is being pro a terrorist organization. And that is the really fundamental, clear difference that we have to make. And I think the problem with what Trump is suggesting is it is so broad and could be so widely applied that you cannot account for those differences.
Pablo, unfortunately, I have to finish there. We have completely run out of time, and that is indeed all from me today. Martin is back tomorrow for a very special Brexit anniversary show. Next up, it's Jubes & Co. with the fierce, and she's very fierce at the moment, fiercest debate show in town. But now, thank you for your company this afternoon. It's Martin back tomorrow. I will see you at the weekend, but now it's time for your weather, and here are your details.
Heavy showers first thing will be followed by a warm, cosy day. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. It's a fine day for most of us with blue skies and any showers tending to ease during the rest of the day before further spells of wet weather arrive overnight as an occluded front moves in from the Atlantic. Now ahead of that, we do have a ridge of high pressure. The Northern Isles seeing low pressure nearby and a continuation of some showers, but elsewhere across Scotland, an early frost and some low temperatures below freezing. Likewise for northern and eastern England ahead of the rain that's moving in. Now, because of that, we'll see some hill snow for a time overnight, but most of the lying snow above about 500 metres. And it's a grey, wet and cold start to the day for many of us on Friday. Northern Ireland seeing the best of any brightness first thing. Otherwise, there'll be a lot of low cloud, outbreaks of rain, some heavy downpours for a time along the south and southeast of England, and some drizzle as well as mist and fog here and there. But Northern Ireland, Western Scotland as well, Western England and Wales starting to brighten up through the morning. Sign of things to come during the rest of the day across western parts of the country. I think for central Scotland into northern and central England as well as the east of England, we'll keep the low cloud through much of the morning, outbreaks of rain and drizzle. The heavier rain tending to ease away towards the southeast, turning drier, and in the west certainly turning brighter by the afternoon with some decent sunny spells coming through. So a pleasant afternoon for western areas, 8 to 10 Celsius with sunny spells. Not feeling quite so pleasant where we keep the low cloud across parts of the Midlands, eastern and northern England as well as central Scotland. That does tend to fizzle away into Friday night, albeit slowly. Further west, we've got clear spells for a time, so a touch of frost, but further cloud and rain comes along at times through the weekend and into the start of next week.
Expect a warm front, moving from the kitchen right through to the rest of the house. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. Problems in Greater Manchester on the M60 continue. The anti-clockwise entry slip road is closed off for junction 11, the A57 Barton exit after a lorry broke down. Moving south into Warwickshire on the M42 northbound, the inside lane closed off from the M40 up to junction 4 where a lorry's broken down. At the Shirley Dorridge exit on the Essex stretch of the M25, the inside lane's closed anti-clockwise just north of the Dartford tunnels for emergency repairs, causing long queues back into Kent towards the M20 at Swanley. And on the Hertfordshire stretch, the motorway is partly blocked anti-clockwise just before junction 25 at the A10. There's been an accident inside the Homestead tunnel. And on the M49, heading up towards the M4 roundabout out of England into Wales, spillage of diesel partly blocking the motorway. You can't get off the M4 onto the M49 at the roundabout. And that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
This is the final week to grab your chance to win our biggest cash prize so far, £50,000 in tax-free cash. How would you react if you won?
We won $25,000. I'd say don't hesitate, do it. If you're not in it, you've got no chance of winning it.
Don't miss out as lines close on Friday. For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 09